A single father loses everything in one decision, fired on the spot for saving a stranger's life. But the woman he rescued wasn't just anyone. She was Victoria Hale, a billionaire CEO who never forgets a debt. Now she's offering him something impossible, a chance to rebuild his life in a world he doesn't belong to. From grease-stained coveralls to corporate boardrooms, one man's choice in the rain will either destroy him or transform everything he thought his life could be. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches. And stay until the end to find out what happens when ordinary courage meets extraordinary power. The wrench slipped. Ethan Cole caught it before it hit the concrete, his knuckles scraping against the undercarriage of the Honda Civic suspended above him. He swore under his breath, wiped the grease on his already filthy jeans, and repositioned himself on the creeper. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with that particular frequency that meant one of them would burn out soon. Probably today, knowing his luck. "Cole, you done with that oil change yet?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was focused on the drain plug, which some previous mechanic had apparently installed with an impact wrench and a prayer. Gary's voice carried across the shop floor again, sharper this time. "I asked you a question." "Almost done," Ethan called back, not bothering to slide out from under the car. He could picture Gary standing there in his too-clean polo shirt, arms crossed, that permanent scowl etched into his face like someone had carved it there with a dull knife. The plug finally gave. Oil streamed into the catch pan with a sound like rain on a tin roof. Ethan watched it pour out, dark and dirty, and tried not to think about how much the color reminded him of his bank account. $300 until payday. Rent was $450. The math didn't work, hadn't worked in months, but somehow he kept making it stretch. Ramen for dinner again. Maybe he could convince Jake it was a culinary choice. "Dad?" Ethan rolled out from under the Civic, blinking in the harsh overhead light. His son stood in the open bay door, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. At 16, Jake had mastered the art of teenage disaffection, but Ethan could still read him. Something was wrong. "Hey, bud, thought you had practice." "Got canceled." Jake shifted his weight, not quite meeting Ethan's eyes. "Coach is sick." "You walk here?" "Yeah." Ethan sat up, joints protesting. 32 wasn't old, but his body felt like it had decades more mileage. "Everything okay?" Jake shrugged, which meant no. Before Ethan could push, Gary's voice cut through the shop again. "Cole, customer waiting!" Ethan looked at his son, then toward the front office where Gary loomed like a particularly aggressive troll guarding a bridge. "Give me 2 minutes. Wait in the break room, okay?" Jake nodded and disappeared. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, wiping his hands on a shop rag that was somehow dirtier than his skin. The break room was generous, a folding table, 2 plastic chairs, and a coffee maker that produced something closer to motor oil than actual coffee. But it was warm and private, and right now that was what Jake needed. The customer at the front counter was Mrs. Chen, who brought her ancient Camry in every 3 months like clockwork. She smiled when she saw Ethan approaching, which was more than Gary ever did. "Ethan, how's that boy of yours?" "Growing like a weed," Ethan said, falling into the easy rhythm of small talk. "Eating me out of house and home." "That's how you know they're healthy." Mrs. Chen handed over her keys. "Just the usual, dear. Nothing fancy." Gary stepped in before Ethan could respond. "We'll have it ready by 5. Standard service package is $89.95. "Ethan always gives me the senior discount," Mrs. Chen said sweetly, and Ethan had to hide his smile at the way Gary's jaw tightened. "Of course, 75 then." Mrs. Chen thanked them and left. The moment the door closed, Gary rounded on Ethan. "Don't undercut me in front of customers. She's been coming here for 8 years. The discount is already in the system." "I don't care if she's been coming here since the place opened. You don't make pricing decisions. You fix cars." Ethan counted to 3 in his head. "Got it. And your kid can't hang out here. This isn't a daycare. He'll be gone in 20 minutes. He better be." Gary turned back toward his office, then paused. "And you're staying late tonight. Henderson's truck needs the transmission done." "I can't tonight. Jake has—" "I don't care what Jake has. You want the hours or not?" The unspoken threat hung in the air. Ethan had been at Miller's Auto for 4 years, ever since the last place folded. Jobs weren't exactly plentiful in a town this size, especially for guys with nothing but a high school diploma and calloused hands. Gary knew it. Ethan knew it. That's why Gary could get away with paying $2 over minimum wage and acting like it was a favor. "I'll make it work," Ethan said quietly. Gary grunted and disappeared into his office. Ethan stood there for a moment, that familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders. The weight of being the only parent, the only provider, the guy who had to say yes because no wasn't an option. He found Jake in the break room, staring at his phone with that 1,000-yard stare teenagers perfected. Ethan grabbed 2 Cokes from the machine, his employee privilege, the only perk Gary offered, and sat down across from his son. "Talk to me." Jake didn't look up. "It's nothing." "Jake." "I said it's nothing, Dad." Ethan popped the tab on his Coke and waited. This was the thing they didn't tell you about single parenting. Half of it was just sitting there, being present, even when your kid was doing everything possible to push you away. Eventually, Jake's defenses cracked. "Got my calc test back." "And?" "C-." Ethan took a sip of his drink, buying time. "That's not like you." "Yeah, well," Jake finally looked up, and there was something raw in his eyes. "Maybe I'm just not that smart." "Hey, don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk about yourself like that." Ethan leaned forward. "One bad grade doesn't mean anything. You've been pulling A's and B's all year." "Mr. Patterson said I should consider dropping to regular math. Said AP is probably too much for me." White-hot anger flashed through Ethan's chest, but he kept his voice level. "Patterson said that? I mean, he's probably right. It's really hard and—" "Jake, look at me." Ethan waited until his son met his eyes. "You're one of the smartest people I know. You understand things I never could. One test doesn't change that." "You have to say that. You're my dad." "I'm saying it because it's true." Ethan reached across the table, almost touching Jake's hand before his son pulled back. 16. Too old for casual affection, especially in public. "Patterson doesn't know you like I do. You want to stay in AP? We'll make it work. I'll help with homework. We'll get you a tutor if we need to." Tutors cost money. And there it was. The thing Jake never said but always thought. The thing that hung over every conversation, every decision, every moment of their lives. "Let me worry about money," Ethan said, even though worry was all he did. "You worry about being 16. Deal?" Jake nodded, not quite convinced, but willing to let it drop. "You working late tonight?" "Yeah, Henderson's transmission. I'll try to be home by 9. There's leftover pizza in the fridge. That's from 3 days ago." "Still good," Jake said, and for the first time since walking in, he almost smiled. Ethan stood, draining the last of his Coke. "Do your homework. Watch whatever you want. Just nothing with explosions if Mrs. Kowalski is home. You know she complains." "She complains if I breathe too loud." "Well, breathe quieter." Jake actually laughed at that, just a short bark of sound. But it was enough. Ethan headed back out to the shop floor feeling marginally less defeated. Small victories. That's what life was now. Small victories stacked on top of each other, hoping they'd somehow add up to something bigger. Mrs. Chen's Camry was straightforward work. Oil change, filter, basic inspection. Ethan found a slow leak in the rear passenger tire and patched it without charging her. Gary would have added it to the bill, called it a discovered service, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to nickel and dime someone living on Social Security. He'd eat the cost of the patch kit. The afternoon crawled by. A brake job on a Ford F-150. A diagnostic on a Subaru that turned out to be nothing more than a loose gas cap. A rotation and balance on a Jeep whose owner insisted on being in the bay, hovering over Ethan's shoulder and asking questions about every tool he picked up. By the time Jake left, waving through the window, earbuds already in, Ethan's back was screaming and his hands ached. Henderson's truck sat in the far bay like a patient waiting for surgery. The transmission had been slipping for months before Henderson finally agreed to bring it in. Now the whole thing needed to be pulled and rebuilt. A 2-day job that Gary wanted done in one night. Because, of course he did. Ethan was wrist-deep in the transmission housing when he heard the sirens. They weren't unusual. The hospital was only 4 blocks away, and ambulances passed by regularly enough that he'd learned to tune them out. But these sirens were different, closer, and they were getting louder. Then they stopped, right outside. Ethan straightened, wiping his hands, and walked toward the open bay door. The ambulance sat at an odd angle in the street, hazard lights flashing, driver's door hanging open. The engine was running, but something about the sound wasn't right. A rough idle, irregular, like it was missing on at least one cylinder. The paramedic, a woman, maybe 30, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, was on her phone, pacing in tight circles. Even from 20 feet away, Ethan could hear the panic in her voice. "I don't know what happened. It just started dying on us. We're 4 blocks from Mercy General, and this thing won't move." Ethan glanced back into the shop. Gary's office light was on, but the door was closed. He was probably on one of his marathon personal calls, the ones where he spent an hour yelling at someone about sports or politics or whatever else crawled up his ass that day. The paramedic was still on the phone. "We have a critical patient. She's stable, but we need to move now." Ethan walked toward the ambulance without really deciding to. His feet just carried him there, the same way they'd carried him into burning buildings back when he'd volunteered with the fire department, before Jake was born, and before life got so complicated that there wasn't room for heroics. "What's the problem?" he called out. The paramedic spun toward him, eyes wide. "The engine's dying. We're losing power." "Pop the hood." "I can't just—" "I'm a mechanic." Ethan gestured back toward Miller's auto. "Pop the hood and let me look." The paramedic hesitated for maybe half a second before lunging back into the driver's seat. The hood release clicked. Ethan lifted it, propping it open with the rod, and immediately saw the problem. The serpentine belt was shredded, not completely gone, but damaged enough that it was barely turning the alternator and slipping off the pulleys with every revolution. Without the alternator, the battery would drain in minutes. They'd lose power steering, power brakes, and eventually the engine would die completely. "How bad?" the paramedic called from the driver's seat. "Belt's shot. You need a replacement." "How long?" Ethan did the math in his head. Run back to the shop, find a belt that would fit, probably a universal, nothing this old would have a direct match in stock. Install it, tension it properly. 20 minutes, maybe 30. "We don't have time!" Another voice came from the back of the ambulance. A male paramedic, younger, visibly stressed. "She's crashing." Ethan peered into the ambulance. The patient was a woman, maybe his age, strapped to a gurney. Her face was pale, too pale, and the monitors beside her were beeping in a way that even Ethan knew wasn't good. An IV line ran into her arm. The male paramedic was checking her vitals, hands moving with practiced efficiency but obvious fear. "What's her status?" the female paramedic demanded. "BP's dropping. Pulse is thready. We need to move." Ethan looked at the engine, at the shredded belt, at the woman on the gurney. His mind was already working through solutions. A temporary fix. Something that would hold for 4 blocks. "I can rig something," he heard himself say. "How long?" 10 minutes? Maybe less? The female paramedic locked eyes with him. "Can you guarantee it'll hold?" "No, but it's your best shot." She made the decision in an instant. "Do it." Ethan was already running back toward the shop. He grabbed a roll of heavy-duty zip ties from his toolbox, a pair of pliers, and a utility knife. Gary's voice stopped him at the bay door. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Ethan turned. Gary stood in his office doorway, arms crossed, that familiar scowl carved even deeper into his face. "Ambulance broke down. I can get them running." "That's not our problem. There's a patient in there. She's dying. And we have paying customers." Gary gestured toward Henderson's truck. "You walk out that door, you're done. I'll find someone who actually wants to work." Ethan looked at his boss, at the truck behind him, at the life he'd spent 4 years building here, paycheck by miserable paycheck. Then he looked back at the ambulance, at the flashing lights, at the woman who didn't have 10 minutes to wait for a tow truck. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I'm sure you will." He walked out. The rain had started while he was inside, a cold October drizzle that promised to get worse. Ethan ignored it, ignored Gary's shouted threats from the bay door, ignored everything except the problem in front of him. The belt was too far gone to salvage. He cut away the damaged section, then used the zip ties to create a makeshift connection between the belt ends. It wasn't pretty, and it definitely wasn't up to code, but it would hold. Probably. Maybe. "How's she doing?" he called into the back. "Not great," the male paramedic shouted back. "BP's at 90/60 and dropping." Ethan's hands moved faster. He reinforced the connection with a second set of zip ties, pulled them tight with the pliers until the plastic bit into the rubber. The belt was shorter now, which meant more tension on the pulleys, which meant it might snap the second they started moving. Or it might hold. "Try starting it," he yelled. The engine turned over. Rough, but it caught. The belt spun, the makeshift repair holding, for now. "It's not going to last long," Ethan said, appearing at the driver's window. Rain dripped down his face, plastering his hair to his forehead. 4 blocks, maybe 5. Don't stop for anything. Don't slow down if you can help it. Just get her there. The female paramedic nodded, already shifting into drive. "What's your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Cole." "Thank you, Ethan." The ambulance pulled away, slower than normal, but moving. Ethan watched until it turned the corner toward Mercy General, then stood there in the rain, tools in his hands, wondering what the hell he'd just done. The answer came when he turned around. Gary stood in the bay door, silhouetted by the shop lights behind him. Even from here, Ethan could see the anger radiating off him like heat. "Get your shit and get out." "Gary, I told you what would happen. You walked, so get your tools and get the hell out of my shop." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to explain about the woman, about doing the right thing, about how some things mattered more than a transmission job on a truck that could wait until tomorrow. But he'd worked for Gary long enough to know it wouldn't matter. Gary wasn't the kind of man who understood doing something just because it needed to be done. So Ethan walked back into the shop, dripping rainwater onto the concrete, and started gathering his tools. It didn't take long. 4 years, and everything he owned fit into 2 toolboxes and a canvas bag. His name tag was still pinned to his shirt. He unpinned it, set it on the workbench, and walked out without looking back. The rain was coming down harder now. Ethan threw his tools into the bed of his truck, a 15-year-old F-150 that burned oil and had a check engine light that had been on for so long he'd stopped noticing it. He climbed into the cab, turned the key, and sat there listening to the engine rumble. Fired. The word sat in his mind like a stone. He'd been written up before, yelled at plenty, but never actually fired. 4 years of showing up early, staying late, fixing Gary's mistakes and dealing with his moods, and it ended like this, over a decision that had taken maybe 3 seconds to make. His phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "When are you coming home?" Ethan looked at the message, at the casual spelling that probably meant Jake was doing anything except homework, and felt something crack in his chest. How was he supposed to explain this? "Hey kid, good news and bad news. Good news, I did the right thing. Bad news, we're probably going to be homeless in a month." He didn't text back. Instead, he put the truck in gear and drove. Not home. Not yet. He couldn't face Jake without a plan, and right now his head was too full of white noise to think straight. So he drove through the rain-soaked streets of their small town, past the closed storefronts and the gas station and the pizza place, where he and Jake used to eat every Friday back when there was money for things like tradition. He ended up at the park, the one with the rusted swing set and the basketball court with the broken hoop. He and Jake used to come here when Jake was little, before school and responsibilities turned his son into someone who was too busy for playgrounds. Ethan parked under a tree that didn't do much to block the rain and watched water stream down the windshield. His phone rang. Unknown number. Probably a spam call, but Ethan answered anyway because what the hell else was he going to do? "Is this Ethan Cole?" "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Mercy General Hospital." A woman's voice, professional but warm. "We have you listed as the person who assisted with an emergency ambulance repair this evening?" Ethan sat up straighter. "Is the patient okay?" "She's in surgery now. The paramedics said without your help she wouldn't have made it here in time." A pause. "The patient is asking to speak with you. Would you be available to come to the hospital?" "Now?" "If possible." She's insistent. Ethan looked at his phone, at the time. 7:30. Jake would be wondering where he was, but something in the nurse's voice made him think this wasn't optional. "Yeah," he said. "I can be there in 10 minutes. He texted Jake on the way. Something came up. Home by 9. "Order pizza, if you're hungry." Jake's response came back immediately. With what money? Fair point. Ethan sent him $20 through Venmo, money he didn't really have but would figure out later, and pulled into the hospital parking lot. Mercy General was the biggest building in town, which wasn't saying much. 4 stories of brick and glass, built in the 70s and renovated piecemeal ever since. Ethan had been here exactly 3 times. When Jake was born, when Jake broke his arm falling off a skateboard, and when Ethan's dad died 6 years ago. Each visit left a mark, and walking through the automatic doors felt like walking into a memory he didn't want to relive. The woman at the reception desk directed him to the 3rd floor. Surgical recovery. He took the stairs because the elevator made him claustrophobic, and because moving helped quiet the noise in his head. The 3rd floor was quieter than the lobby. Hushed conversations, beeping monitors, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. A different nurse, older, with kind eyes and graying hair, met him at the desk. "Mr. Cole?" "That's me. Thank you for coming. Ms. Hale is recovering well from surgery. She's groggy from the anesthesia, but she insisted on seeing you." "Hale?" The name didn't mean anything to Ethan. Victoria Hale. The nurse said it like he should recognize the name. When he didn't react, she added, "The CEO of Hale Industries?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't really follow business news." The nurse smiled, like this was charming instead of ignorant. "She's one of the wealthiest people in the state. Her company builds medical devices, pharmaceuticals, that sort of thing. She's quite influential." Great. Ethan had saved a billionaire. That would look fantastic on his unemployment application. The nurse led him down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. She stopped at a door marked 304 and knocked softly before opening it. "Ms. Hale, your visitor is here." The room was private, which made sense if the patient was rich. A single bed, a window looking out over the parking lot, machines beeping quietly in the corner. The woman in the bed looked nothing like Ethan had imagined a billionaire CEO would look. She was younger than him, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back from a pale face. An IV line ran into her arm, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been well for a while. But her eyes were sharp, alert, taking Ethan in with an intensity that made him want to check if he had grease on his face. "Mr. Cole?" she said. Her voice was hoarse, probably from the breathing tube during surgery. "Thank you for coming. How are you feeling? Like I've been gutted and stitched back together." A faint smile. "Which is exactly what happened, so I suppose that's accurate." Ethan stood awkwardly near the door, not sure where he was supposed to be or what he was supposed to do with his hands. "The nurse said you wanted to see me?" "I wanted to thank you." Victoria shifted slightly in the bed, wincing. "The paramedics told me what you did, said you fixed their ambulance with zip ties and determination. It was a temporary solution, not exactly engineering genius. It kept me alive long enough to get here. That seems fairly genius to me." She studied him with those sharp eyes. "You didn't have to help. Most people wouldn't have." Ethan thought about Gary, about the truck waiting in the shop, about the paycheck he wouldn't be getting. "Yeah, well, I'm starting to think most people are smarter than me." "You lost your job." It wasn't a question. Ethan wondered how she knew, then realized the paramedics must have told her. "My boss wasn't thrilled about me abandoning his truck to help strangers." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. That job was killing me anyway, just slower than your ambulance was killing you." Victoria laughed, then grimaced, hand going to her abdomen. "Don't make me laugh. The stitches don't appreciate it." She was quiet for a moment, just looking at him. "What do you do, Mr. Cole? Besides rescue billionaires?" "I was a mechanic. I guess now I'm unemployed." "Family?" "A son, 16. It's just the two of us." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "Then you couldn't afford to lose that job." "No," Ethan admitted. "I really couldn't. And you helped anyway." Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. I'm starting to question that assessment. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The machines beeped. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. Finally, she spoke. "I want to offer you a job." Ethan blinked. "What? A job? At my company? I need people who can think on their feet, who understand how things work, who don't just follow orders when following orders means someone dies." She shifted again, stronger now, more like the CEO the nurse had described. "I don't know exactly what position yet. That's something we'd have to figure out together. But I know I want someone like you on my team." "Ms. Hale, Victoria." "Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I'm a mechanic. I barely graduated high school. I don't know anything about medical devices or pharmaceuticals or whatever it is your company does." You know how to solve problems. You know how to work under pressure. And you know how to do the right thing even when it costs you everything. Victoria leaned back against her pillows, suddenly looking exhausted. Those are skills I can't teach. Everything else is just training. Ethan stood there, tools in his mental hands, trying to fix a problem he didn't understand. A job at a billion-dollar company. It was insane. Impossible. A fairy tale. I need to think about it, he said finally. Of course, take your time. Victoria gestured to a business card on the bedside table. That has my assistant's number. Call within the week if you're interested. Or don't call. Either way, thank you for what you did today. You saved my life. Ethan picked up the card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, Victoria Hale, CEO, Hale Industries. A phone number. An address in the city, 40 miles away. I hope you feel better, he said, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. Mr. Cole? Victoria's voice stopped him at the door. Your boss was wrong to fire you. What you did today took courage. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise. Ethan nodded and left before his throat could get any tighter. The drive home was a blur of rain and headlights and thoughts that wouldn't stay still long enough to examine. A job offer from a billionaire. It was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not to guys like him. Guys who lived in rented apartments and bought day-old bread and wore the same 3 pairs of jeans until they wore through at the knees. Jake was on the couch when Ethan walked in, surrounded by textbooks but clearly watching something on his laptop. He paused it when Ethan appeared, eyes going to his father's wet clothes, his empty hands. Where's your toolbox? In the truck. Why? Ethan sat down heavily in the chair across from his son. I got fired. Jake's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, fear, anger, and finally settling on a careful blankness that hurt more than any of the others. What happened? Ethan told him. The ambulance, the patient, Gary's ultimatum, the choice that hadn't really been a choice at all. Jake listened without interrupting, and when Ethan finished, his son was quiet for a long time. So we're screwed, Jake said finally. No, we're not screwed. Dad, you just lost your job. We're like $300 from being evicted. How are we not screwed? Because I'm good at what I do. I'll find another job. When? How? Jake's voice cracked on the last word, and Ethan saw the fear underneath the anger. The same fear he'd been carrying around since he was Jake's age, when his own dad walked out, and his mom worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent. We can't afford for you to be unemployed. We can't afford anything. I know. Then why did you do it? Why did you help those people if you knew you'd get fired? It was the question Ethan had been asking himself since Gary's ultimatum. Why had he walked out? Why had he thrown away 4 years of stability for strangers he'd never see again? Because she was dying, Ethan said quietly. And I could help. That's all. It wasn't heroic or noble or any of that bullshit. I just looked at her and knew I couldn't walk away. Jake stared at him, and Ethan couldn't read the expression on his son's face. Disappointment? Understanding? Both? You're an idiot, Jake said finally. Yeah, probably. A complete idiot. I've been told. Jake shook his head, but there was something softer in his eyes now. What are we going to do? Ethan thought about the business card in his pocket, the impossible offer. The door that had opened the same day, another one slammed shut. I don't know yet, he admitted. But we'll figure it out. We always do. It wasn't much of an answer. It wasn't really an answer at all. But it was what he had, and somehow it was enough. Jake nodded and went back to his laptop, and Ethan sat in the chair, rain still dripping from his hair, and tried to believe his own words. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the apartment was warm and dry and falling apart at the seams, held together by duct tape and determination and the stubborn refusal to give up. Ethan closed his eyes and let the exhaustion wash over him. Tomorrow he'd start looking for work. Tomorrow he'd call the landlord and beg for an extension on rent. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to keep the lights on and food in the fridge and his son in that AP calculus class that some teacher thought he wasn't smart enough for. But tonight, he sat in the chair and listened to his son breathe and wondered if maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing was enough. Even if it cost him everything. The apartment felt smaller in the morning light. Or maybe Ethan just felt bigger, swollen with the weight of unemployment and bad decisions. He lay in bed staring at the water stain on the ceiling, shaped vaguely like Texas, or maybe a deformed hand, and tried to convince himself to get up. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Marcus Webb, plant manager at Davidson Manufacturing. Gary Miller gave me your name, says you're looking for work. We might have something. Can you come in today?" Ethan read it twice, trying to figure out the angle. Gary had fired him less than 24 hours ago, and now he was giving out references? Either hell had frozen over or this was some kind of trap. He texted back, "What time?" The response came immediately, 10 a.m., bring your tools. It was 7:30. Ethan rolled out of bed, joints cracking, and shuffled to the bathroom. The mirror showed exactly what he expected. A 32-year-old man who looked 40, with permanent grease under his fingernails and worry lines etched into his forehead. He splashed water on his face and tried to remember the last time he'd felt actually rested. Jake's door was still closed. The kid was probably asleep, or pretending to be, avoiding the conversation neither of them wanted to have. Ethan left a note on the kitchen counter, "Job interview, back by noon, don't skip school," and grabbed his keys. Davidson Manufacturing sat on the edge of town, a sprawling complex of warehouses and fabrication shops that employed maybe 200 people. Ethan had driven past it 1,000 times, but never actually been inside. The parking lot was already half full when he arrived. Trucks and sedans lined up in neat rows like students waiting for the bell. Marcus Webb met him at the front office. He was a big man, 50-something, with the kind of handshake that tested your commitment. "Ethan Cole? That's me. Marcus, come on back." They walked through the main factory floor, past CNC machines and welding stations and workers in safety glasses who didn't look up from their tasks. The noise was incredible. Metal on metal, pneumatic hisses, the constant hum of machinery that Ethan felt in his chest. It reminded him of the auto shop, but bigger, louder, more industrial. Marcus's office was a glass box overlooking the floor. He gestured for Ethan to sit, then settled behind a desk covered in blueprints and work orders. "Gary said you walked out on him yesterday." "He say why?" "Said you abandoned a job to fix an ambulance." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That true?" "Pretty much." "And he fired you for it?" "Yeah." Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying Ethan like he was a part that didn't quite fit the specs. "Gary's an asshole, but he runs a tight shop. You worked for him 4 years. That says something about your tolerance for bullshit. I needed the job. And now you need a different job." Marcus pulled a work order from the stack on his desk. "We've got a fabrication line that keeps jamming. 3 different techs have looked at it. None of them can figure it out. You think you can? I can look at it." "Looking's free. Fixing it gets you hired." Marcus stood. "Come on." The fabrication line was at the far end of the building, a series of conveyor belts and hydraulic presses that should have been moving parts through a stamping process. Instead, everything was stopped, and 2 workers stood nearby looking frustrated. "This is Cole," Marcus announced. "He's going to fix your problem." One of the workers, a woman maybe 10 years older than Ethan with her hair in a bandana, raised an eyebrow. "No offense, but we've had 3 guys look at this already." "Then I guess I'll be the 4th. Ethan set his toolbox down and started examining the line. The jam was happening at the second press station, where stamped parts were supposed to transfer to the next conveyor. Instead, they were piling up, creating a bottleneck. He spent 20 minutes tracing the system, checking sensors, testing hydraulics. The other workers watched with varying degrees of skepticism. Marcus stood off to the side, arms crossed, not helping, but not leaving either. The problem turned out to be stupidly simple. Someone had replaced a sensor mount with the wrong size bolt, throwing off the calibration by maybe 3 millimeters. Not enough to trigger an error code, but enough to make the transfer arm miss its pickup point by a fraction. Parts piled up, the system jammed, and everyone blamed the machinery when really it was just a bolt. Ethan swapped it out with the correct size from his toolbox, recalibrated the sensor, and ran a test cycle. The parts moved smoothly through the press, transferring perfectly to the next station. The woman in the bandana whistled. "Well, damn." Marcus walked over, examined the fix, then looked at Ethan. "When can you start?" "Today?" "Good. 15 an hour, full benefits after 90 days. You'll work maintenance, keep these lines running. Sound good?" It sounded better than unemployment. Ethan nodded, and just like that, he had a job again. less than 24 hours after losing the last one. It should have felt like a victory, but mostly it just felt like treading water in a pool that kept getting deeper. He worked until 4, learning the systems, meeting the crew, trying to remember names and procedures and which tools he'd need to keep in his box. The woman in the bandana was named Rita, and she took it upon herself to show him around like he was a new kid at school. "Marcus is fair," she said as they walked between machines. "He'll work you hard, but he's not a dick about it. You screw up, he'll tell you. You do good, he'll tell you that too. Better than my last boss. Gary Miller? Yeah, I heard about that." Rita glanced at him sideways. "Heard you saved somebody's life." "I fixed an ambulance." "Same thing, way I understand it." She stopped at a coffee station, actual decent coffee, not the motor oil Gary used to pass off as drinkable, and poured 2 cups. "You got kids?" "A son, 16. "Yeah? I got 3. 2 in college, 1 still in high school, expensive as hell." She handed him a cup. "This job will cover it, though. Not great money, but steady. That's worth something." Steady. The word settled in Ethan's chest like a promise he wasn't sure he could trust. Nothing in his life had ever been steady. Not his marriage, which had lasted 3 years before his wife decided she wanted a different life. Not his jobs, which came and went like seasons. Not even his apartment, which he'd almost lost twice in the past year alone. But maybe this time would be different. Maybe he could just put his head down, fix machines, collect paychecks, and build something stable for Jake. Maybe the smart thing to do was forget about billionaire CEOs and impossible job offers and stick with what he knew. He was still thinking about it when he got home and found Jake at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks but clearly not studying. "How'd it go?" Jake asked without looking up. "Got hired." Now Jake looked up. "Seriously? 15 an hour, benefits after 3 months. It's at Davidson Manufacturing. That's good, right? It's something." Ethan grabbed a beer from the fridge, his one allowed vice, and only after shifts like this, and sat down across from his son. "How was school?" "Fine." "Jake?" "It was fine, Dad. Same as always. Patterson's still a dick, lunch still sucks, and I'm still not sure why I'm bothering with any of it." Ethan took a long drink, buying time. "You're bothering because education matters." "Does it? You didn't go to college and you're doing okay. I'm 32 years old making $15 an hour at a factory job. That's not okay, that's survival." Ethan leaned forward. "You're smarter than me. You could actually do something with a degree." "Like what? Go into debt for 4 years and then end up in the same place anyway?" Jake's voice had that edge it got when he was channeling fear into anger. "College costs money we don't have, Dad. I'm not stupid. I know how broke we are." "We'll figure it out." "How?" "You just got fired yesterday. We're behind on rent. The truck needs new tires. My phone screen is cracked and I can't get it fixed. How exactly are we going to figure out college?" The business card was still in Ethan's wallet. He could feel it there, pressed against his driver's license, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. "There might be something else," he heard himself say. Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" So Ethan told him. About Victoria Hale, about the hospital visit, about a job offer that made no sense but had been extended anyway. Jake listened with the same expression he'd worn the night before, part skepticism, part hope, like he wanted to believe but had learned better. "A billionaire offered you a job," Jake said slowly when Ethan finished. "Yeah." "Doing what?" "She didn't say exactly, something at her company. Said she'd figure out the details." "And you didn't take it?" "I took the Davidson job instead." Jake stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Why?" "Because it's real. Because I know how to fix machines. Because taking a job from someone I saved feels like charity, and I'm not great with charity." "Dad." Jake set down his pencil with deliberate care. "We are broke. Like actually broke. And you're turning down a job from a billionaire because of pride. It's not pride. It's absolutely pride. You'd rather work at a factory for 15 an hour than take a chance on something that might actually change our lives." Jake's voice was rising now, frustration spilling over. "Do you know what I could do with real money? I could go to college. I could study something that actually matters. I could stop worrying about whether we're going to make rent every month." "You think I don't worry about that? I know you do. That's my point. You worry constantly and work yourself into the ground, and we're still barely making it. So when someone offers you a way out, maybe you should take it instead of deciding you're too good for help." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He sat back in his chair, beer forgotten, looking at his son and seeing someone older than 16. Someone who'd grown up too fast because his dad couldn't shield him from the reality of their situation. "It's not about being too good for help," Ethan said quietly. "It's about not knowing if I can do it. I'm a mechanic, Jake. I fix cars and machines and things that make sense. I don't know anything about running a company or working in an office or whatever the hell she wants me to do." "So learn." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Jake leaned forward, and there was something fierce in his eyes that reminded Ethan of himself at that age. "You learned how to fix cars. You learned how to be a dad. You learned how to keep us afloat even when everything was falling apart. Why can't you learn this?" Ethan didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had too many answers, all of them rooted in fear. Fear of failing, fear of looking stupid, fear of discovering that he really was just a mechanic and nothing more. "What if I screw it up?" he asked. "Then you screw it up. At least you tried." Jake picked up his pencil again, but his hand was shaking slightly. "I'm tired of watching you settle for less because you're scared. You tell me I'm smart enough for AP calculus, that I shouldn't let Patterson make me doubt myself. Maybe you should take your own advice." The words hung in the air between them. Outside, a car alarm went off. Someone's kid started crying, the normal symphony of their apartment complex. Inside, Ethan felt something shift, like a piece of machinery finally clicking into place. "I'll call her," he said. Jake looked up, suspicious. "Really?" "Yeah, tomorrow. I'll call and see what she actually wants, no promises beyond that." For the first time in days, Jake smiled. It was small, tentative, but real. Okay, Ethan echoed, and hoped he wasn't making another stupid decision. He didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, his brain spun through scenarios. Walking into some glass tower in a suit he couldn't afford. Sitting in meetings where everyone spoke in acronyms he didn't understand. Failing spectacularly in front of people who'd known from the start. He didn't belong. At 2 a.m, he gave up and went to the kitchen. The business card sat on the counter where he'd left it, gleaming in the streetlight filtering through the window. He picked it up, ran his thumb over the embossed letters, and tried to imagine a version of himself who fit in Victoria Hale's world. The image wouldn't come. At 7, he texted Marcus. Something came up. "Need to take a personal day." The response came fast. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, family stuff. Be in tomorrow." "No problem. Take care of it." Ethan stared at the exchange. Marcus had known him for 1 day and was already being more understanding than Gary had been in 4 years. It should have made the decision easier, but somehow it made it harder. The Davidson job was safe, predictable. He could show up, fix machines, collect paychecks, and never have to worry about being anything other than what he already was. But Jake's words kept echoing in his head. "I'm tired of watching you settle for less because you're scared." At 8:30, after Jake left for school, with a pointed look that said you better actually call her, Ethan dialed the number on the card. A woman answered on the second ring. "Victoria Hale's office." "Hi, this is Ethan Cole. Ms. Hale said I should call if—" "Mr. Cole, yes, Ms. Hale has been expecting your call. Hold, please." There was a click, then silence, then Victoria's voice, stronger than it had been in the hospital. "Mr. Cole, I was starting to think you weren't going to call." "Yeah, well, I've been thinking about your offer." "And?" Ethan took a breath. "I need to know what you actually want me to do. You said you'd figure out the position, but I need more than that. I can't just walk away from a real job for a maybe." "Fair enough." There was rustling on the other end like she was moving papers. "I've been thinking about that too. Here's what I know. My company builds medical equipment. Ventilators, monitors, diagnostic machines. We have brilliant engineers and designers, but most of them have never actually been in an emergency situation. They've never had to fix something critical with limited tools and no time." "Okay, you have. And more than that, you think differently than they do. You see problems as things to solve, not obstacles to document." Another pause. "I want to create a position, call it an operational troubleshooter. Someone who works with our teams on the ground, who understands how equipment fails in real conditions, who can bridge the gap between design and reality. Ethan tried to picture it and couldn't. That sounds like it needs someone with an engineering degree. It needs someone who can solve problems. The rest we can teach. Victoria's voice softened slightly. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. It'll be hard. You'll be learning on the job, probably making mistakes, definitely dealing with people who question why you're there, but I think you can do it. The question is whether you think you can. It was the same question Jake had asked, just phrased differently. Ethan looked around his apartment, the peeling paint, the secondhand furniture, the life he'd built from scraps and stubbornness. What's the pay? He asked. $60,000 to start. Full benefits immediately. Performance reviews every 6 months with room for advancement. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. $60,000. He currently made $28,000. The difference wasn't just money, it was possibility. College for Jake, a better apartment, maybe even savings, that mythical thing he'd heard other people had. I have a son, he said. He's in high school. I can't take a job that's going to have me traveling constantly or working 100-hour weeks. Understood. We'll work around your schedule. This isn't about grinding you into dust, Mr. Cole. It's about putting your skills to use in a way that matters. When would I start? Monday, if you're willing. That gives you the rest of the week to settle things with your current situation. Current situation. She meant the Davidson job he'd worked exactly 1 day. Marcus would understand probably. Or maybe he'd think Ethan was flaky, unreliable, just another guy who couldn't commit to anything. Either way, this was happening. Okay, Ethan said. I'm in. Excellent. My assistant will email you the details, address, start time, what to bring. Welcome to Hale Industries, Mr. Cole. She hung up before he could say anything else. Ethan stood in his kitchen, phone in his hand, and tried to process what he'd just done. 4 days ago, he was fixing cars for Gary Miller. Now he was working for a billionaire CEO doing a job that didn't fully exist yet. His phone buzzed, an email from someone named Jennifer Park with an Hale Industries address. He skimmed it. Report Monday at 9, business casual attire, bring ID for security clearance. Orientation would last most of the day. Business casual. Ethan looked down at his jeans and work boots and realized he owned exactly 0 items of business casual clothing. Another expense he couldn't afford, but would have to figure out. He called Marcus. Cole? Everything okay with the family? Yeah, listen, I need to tell you something. Ethan closed his eyes, hating this part. I got another job offer. Better pay, better opportunity. I'm really sorry, but I have to take it. There was a long pause. This about that ambulance thing? How does everyone know about that? Marcus laughed. Small town, news travels. Let me guess. The woman you saved offered you a job. Something like that. Well, hell, can't compete with that. Another pause. You're making the right call. Don't let anyone tell you different. You sure? Kid, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know a guy who's settling when I see one. You weren't built for factory work. Go see what else you can do. Ethan felt his throat get tight. Thanks, Marcus. Don't thank me, just don't screw it up. I'll try not to. He spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled panic. Rita from Davidson gave him the name of a thrift shop that specialized in office clothes, and he found 2 pairs of khakis and 3 button-down shirts that almost fit. Jake helped him set up an email account that wasn't the Hotmail address he'd been using since 2003. He watched YouTube videos about corporate culture and appropriate workplace behavior and felt increasingly like he was studying for a test in a language he didn't speak. Saturday afternoon, Jake found him staring at his closet like it might reveal some secret knowledge. You're overthinking this, Jake said. I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody does. You'll figure it out. Jake handed him a tie. Where had he even gotten a tie? And demonstrated how to knot it. You fixed an ambulance with zip ties. You can handle an office job. Those are completely different skills. Are they, though? Both require problem solving. Both require staying calm under pressure. Both require not being an asshole. Jake stepped back, examining his work. You look like a dad trying to go to a funeral. That's encouraging. I'm just saying maybe lose the tie. You're not a tie guy. Ethan pulled it off gratefully. What if they laugh at me? Then they're assholes and you leave. but I don't think they will. Jake sat on the bed, suddenly serious. You're always telling me I'm smart enough, good enough, all that stuff. Maybe believe it about yourself, too. Sunday night, Ethan couldn't eat. He stood at the window watching cars pass and tried to remember the last time he'd felt this nervous. Maybe his wedding day, maybe the day Jake was born. Both of those had turned out complicated, but not disasters. Maybe this would be the same. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Victoria. Just wanted to wish you luck tomorrow. You're going to do great. See you at the welcome meeting at 2 p.m. Ethan read it 3 times. A billionaire CEO was texting him good luck. His life had gotten very weird very fast. He texted back, "Thanks. I'll try not to embarrass you." Her response came immediately. "You couldn't if you tried. Sleep well." He didn't sleep well. He barely slept at all. But when Monday morning came and the alarm went off at 6:30, Ethan got up, put on his thrift store khakis and button-down shirt, and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked exactly like what he was, a mechanic playing dress-up. But maybe that was okay. Maybe he didn't need to look like he belonged. Maybe he just needed to show up and figure out the rest as he went. Jake was already awake, eating cereal at the kitchen table. He looked up when Ethan emerged. "You look good." "I look terrified." "Yeah, but in a good way." Jake stood, grabbed his backpack. "I'm proud of you, Dad." The words hit Ethan square in the chest. He pulled his son into a hug before Jake could protest, held him for 3 seconds, then let go. "Get to school. Study hard. Don't let Patterson tell you you're not smart enough for anything." "Same to you," Jake said, and walked out the door. Ethan stood in the empty apartment for another minute, gathering courage from wherever courage came from. Then he grabbed his keys, walked out to his truck, and started the engine. Hale Industries was 40 miles away in the city. The GPS said it would take 53 minutes. Ethan gave himself 90, just in case, and drove through the morning traffic with his stomach in knots. The building was everything he'd imagined and worse. Glass and steel rising 20 stories with a lobby that looked like something from a magazine. People in actual suits walked past carrying briefcases and coffee cups, talking in clusters about things Ethan couldn't hear but assumed were important. He felt like an imposter before he even walked through the door. Security took his ID, checked his name against a list, and gave him a visitor badge. A woman in her 20s with perfect makeup and confidence that probably came from never having worried about rent met him at the elevators. "Mr. Cole, I'm Jennifer Park, Ms. Hale's assistant. Welcome to Hale Industries." "Thanks, and it's just Ethan." "Ethan." Perfect. She led him into the elevator, pressed the button for the 14th floor. "You'll spend this morning in orientation, HR paperwork, building tour, that sort of thing. Then Ms. Hale wants to meet with you at 2 to discuss your role more specifically." The elevator was glass on one side, showing the city sprawling below as they rose. Ethan tried not to think about how high up they were or how far he'd fallen outside his comfort zone. "Any advice?" he asked. Jennifer smiled. "Just be yourself. That's why Ms. Hale hired you." Ethan wanted to point out that being himself had gotten him fired from his last job, but the elevator doors opened before he could say anything. The next 4 hours were a blur of forms and faces and information that came too fast to process. Benefits enrollment, emergency contacts, direct deposit setup, a tour of facilities he'd never used and departments he didn't understand. Everyone was friendly in that professional way that felt rehearsed, and Ethan smiled and nodded and tried to remember even a fraction of what he was being told. At 1:50, Jennifer appeared again to escort him to Victoria's office. The executive floor was quieter than the rest of the building, carpeted and windowed and designed to impress. Ethan's work boots, the only shoes he owned, felt too loud on the expensive floors. Victoria's office was at the end of a long hallway. Jennifer knocked once, then opened the door. "Mr. Cole is here." "Send him in." Ethan walked into a space that was bigger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city stretched out like a promise. Victoria sat behind a desk that probably cost more than his truck, but she stood when he entered, walking around to greet him properly. She looked better than she had in the hospital, color back in her face, energy in her movements. She was wearing a suit that fit perfectly and probably cost more than his monthly rent, but her handshake was firm and her smile seemed genuine. "Ethan, how are you feeling?" "Terrified," he admitted. She laughed. Good. That means you care. She gestured to a chair. Sit. Let's talk about what happens next. Ethan sat in the chair Victoria had indicated, trying not to think about how much it probably cost or how out of place he felt. The leather was softer than anything he'd ever owned, and the view behind Victoria's desk showed the entire city stretched out like a circuit board, all grids and glowing lights, even in daylight. Victoria settled back into her own chair, studying him with that same intensity she'd had in the hospital. You survived orientation. Barely. I signed so many forms I'm pretty sure I accidentally sold you my soul. She smiled. Just your non-compete clause. The soul comes later. She pulled a folder from her desk. I want to be straight with you about what you're walking into. This company has been my life for 8 years. I built it from the ground up, and I'm very protective of it. The people here are brilliant, dedicated, and in some cases going to resent the hell out of you. That's encouraging. I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to prepare you. Victoria opened the folder, slid an organizational chart across the desk. You'll be working primarily with our field operations team. They handle equipment deployment, maintenance contracts, emergency repairs. Right now, they're managed by Robert Chen. He's been with me for 6 years. He's excellent at his job, and he's going to think I hired you out of misplaced gratitude. Did you? No. I hired you because I watched you solve a problem under pressure that 3 trained paramedics couldn't solve. That's the skill set I need. She tapped the chart. But Robert won't see it that way, not at first. You'll have to prove yourself. Ethan looked at the chart, at the dozens of names and positions that meant nothing to him yet. How am I supposed to prove myself when I don't even know what half these departments do? By doing exactly what you did with that ambulance. See the problem, fix the problem. Don't get caught up in bureaucracy or hierarchy or the 17 different approval processes we have for everything. Victoria leaned forward. That's why you're here, Ethan. Everyone else in this building thinks in terms of protocols and procedures. You think in terms of results. I need both, but right now I have too much of one and not enough of the other. And if I screw up, then we'll figure it out together. But I don't think you will. She stood, walked to the window. I almost died last week. Not hypothetically, not in the abstract sense that we're all dying slowly. I mean, I was minutes away from actual death, and the only reason I'm standing here is because you made a choice that cost you your job. You didn't ask me to make that choice. No. But you made it anyway. That tells me more about who you are than any resume ever could. She turned back to face him. I don't need someone with an MBA or 10 years of corporate experience. I need someone who understands that sometimes the right thing to do is grab your tools and run into the rain, consequences be damned. The words settled over Ethan like a weight and a gift at the same time. He thought about Jake, about the apartment, about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then he thought about his son telling him to stop settling out of fear. When do I start actually working? He asked. Tomorrow. Robert's team has a situation at County General Hospital. One of our ventilators is malfunctioning, and the on-site tech can't figure out why. I want you to go with them, observe, see how we handle these calls. Victoria sat back down. And Ethan, don't just observe. If you see the problem, speak up. I didn't hire you to be silent. Even if it pisses people off? Especially then. They talked for another 30 minutes about logistics and expectations and the million small details that went into starting a new job. Victoria answered every question Ethan asked and several he didn't know to ask. And by the time he left her office, his head was spinning, but his resolve felt steadier. Jennifer met him at the elevator with a packet of information. Your team assignment, building access card, parking pass, and Robert Chen's contact information. He's expecting you tomorrow at 7. 7 in the morning? Field operations starts early. Is that a problem? Ethan thought about the years he'd started work at 6 to beat Gary's morning mood. No, I can do 7. Perfect. Do you have any questions? About 1,000, but none that Jennifer could probably answer. I'm good. Thanks. The drive home felt longer than the drive in, like he was traveling between 2 different worlds. The city gave way to suburbs, then to the smaller, shabbier town he actually lived in. By the time he pulled into his apartment complex parking lot, the sun was starting to set, and Ethan felt like he'd lived an entire week in one day. Jake was home, sprawled on the couch, with his calculus book open, but his attention clearly on his phone. He looked up when Ethan walked in. "You're alive." "Barely." Ethan collapsed into the chair, suddenly exhausted. "That was the longest day of my life." "How was it?" "Terrifying, confusing, completely outside anything I've ever done." Ethan loosened the collar of his shirt. "I start actual work tomorrow." "Doing what?" "Going to a hospital with a team to fix a broken ventilator. Apparently I'm supposed to observe and learn how they do things." Jake set down his phone, actually interested now. "That's pretty cool though, right? You'll be fixing medical equipment instead of cars." "I'll be trying to fix medical equipment. There's a difference." Ethan rubbed his eyes. "The guy managing the team thinks Victoria only hired me because she feels grateful, which is probably true. Who cares why she hired you? You're there now. Just do the job." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one walking into a situation where everyone thinks you don't belong." Jake gave him a look that was pure teenage exasperation mixed with something older. "Dad, I'm a scholarship kid at a school where everyone else's parents drive Range Rovers. I know exactly what it's like to feel like you don't belong. You do it anyway." The observation hit harder than Ethan expected. He'd been so focused on his own anxiety, he hadn't thought about what Jake dealt with every day. His son navigated a world of privilege and wealth that they'd never be part of, and he did it without complaint. Maybe Ethan could learn something from that. "You're smarter than me," Ethan said quietly. "I know, I get it from Mom's side." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. "Homework done?" "Working on it. Patterson assigned 30 problems for tomorrow." "Want help?" "You failed algebra twice." "Fair point." Ethan stood, headed for the kitchen. "Pizza for dinner?" "We had pizza yesterday." "Then leftover pizza, or I could make eggs." "Pizza's fine." They ate in comfortable silence, the TV playing some show neither of them were really watching. This was their routine, had been for years. Just the two of them figuring it out, making it work, getting by on stubbornness and the refusal to give up. The job might change, the apartment might change, but this part stayed the same. At 9, Jake disappeared into his room to finish homework. Ethan cleaned up the kitchen, then sat at the table reviewing the packet Jennifer had given him. Tomorrow's assignment was outlined in corporate language that took him 3 tries to parse. They'd be responding to a service call at County General, priority level 2, equipment malfunction, estimated repair time 2 to 4 hours. The team would consist of Robert Chen as lead technician, Maya Santos as junior tech, and now Ethan as operational troubleshooter. Operational troubleshooter. He still didn't know what that meant in practical terms, but he'd figure it out. Same way he figured out everything else. His phone buzzed. A text from a number that turned out to be Robert Chen. "Got word you're joining us tomorrow. Meet at the office at 7. We roll out at 7:15. Don't be late." Ethan texted back. "I'll be there." No response. Not exactly a warm welcome, but Ethan hadn't expected one. Victoria had warned him that Robert would be skeptical. He'd just have to deal with it. He set his alarm for 5:30, which felt obscenely early until he remembered he used to start work at 6 regularly. His body could handle it. The question was whether his brain could handle everything that came after. Sleep was fractured and unsatisfying. Ethan drifted in and out of dreams where he was trying to fix equipment he didn't understand while people in suits watched and shook their heads. When the alarm finally went off, he almost felt relieved to be done pretending to rest. Jake was still asleep. Ethan left a note, "First day in the field, wish me luck, love you," and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. The drive to the city was easier without traffic, and he pulled into the Hale Industries parking garage at 6:40. The field operations office was on the second floor, a workspace that looked more like a garage than the corporate floors above. Equipment lined the walls, tools hung on pegboards, and there was an actual coffee maker that produced something that smelled decent. 2 people were already there. The woman was younger than Ethan, maybe mid-20s, with her dark hair pulled into a ponytail and grease already on her hands from whatever she'd been working on. She looked up when he entered, assessed him in one quick glance, and went back to her task. The man was closer to Ethan's age, Chinese-American, with the kind of precise movements that suggested military background or just obsessive attention to detail. He was loading equipment into a hard case with the care someone might give to defusing a bomb. "You Cole?" the man asked without looking up. "Yeah, you must be Robert." "That's me? This is Maya." Robert gestured to the woman, who nodded but didn't speak. You ever worked on medical equipment before? No. You know anything about ventilators? Only what they do, not how they do it. Robert finally looked up, and his expression was exactly what Ethan had expected. Skeptical, bordering on hostile, with a side of, "Why the hell are you here?" "Victoria said you're supposed to shadow us today. Learn how we operate." "That's the plan." "Great. Here's how we operate. Maya and I handle the technical work. You observe. Don't touch anything unless I tell you to. Don't offer opinions unless I ask for them. Don't get in the way. Clear?" "Crystal." "Good." Robert closed the case, locked it. "We leave in 10. There's coffee if you want it." Ethan poured himself a cup, leaning against the counter while Robert and Maya finished their prep work. They moved around each other with the efficiency of people who'd worked together a long time, communicating in half sentences and hand gestures that didn't need explanation. Ethan was the outsider here, the new variable in an equation that had been working fine without him. Maya finally spoke, her voice softer than Ethan expected. "You're the guy who fixed the ambulance." "Yeah, with zip ties. It was what I had." She almost smiled. "Robert thinks Victoria hired you as a publicity thing, like a hero reward program." "What do you think?" Maya shrugged. "I think if Victoria hired you, she has a reason. She doesn't do anything without a reason." She glanced at Robert, who was deliberately ignoring them. "But you're still going to have to prove you're not dead weight." "I can live with that." They loaded into a van marked with the Hale Industries logo, Robert driving, Maya in the passenger seat, Ethan in the back with the equipment. The drive to County General took 20 minutes through morning traffic that was just starting to build. Nobody spoke, which was fine with Ethan. He spent the time looking out the window and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. County General was the second largest hospital in the region, a sprawling complex of buildings that looked like they'd been added onto over decades without much concern for aesthetic consistency. Robert parked in a service entrance and they unloaded the equipment, Maya taking the hard case while Robert grabbed a tablet and clipboard. The maintenance supervisor met them at the loading dock, a harried-looking man in his 50s who seemed grateful to see them. "Thank God. We've been running on backup systems since midnight. If we lose another ventilator, we're going to have to transfer patients." "What's the failure mode?" Robert asked, already walking toward the elevators. "Intermittent pressure loss. The alarm system keeps triggering, but the diagnostics aren't showing any errors. Our on-site tech couldn't figure it out." They rode up to the ICU, the supervisor explaining the situation while Robert made notes on his tablet. Ethan followed, staying quiet, just absorbing information. The ICU was controlled chaos, nurses and doctors moving with purpose between rooms full of equipment and patients fighting to stay alive. The malfunctioning ventilator was in a room by itself, disconnected from any patient, with printouts of error logs taped to the side. Robert set up immediately, connecting his diagnostic equipment while Maya opened the hard case and started pulling tools. "Talk me through what you tried," Robert said to the maintenance supervisor. "Checked all the connections, replaced the filter, ran the calibration sequence twice. Everything tests normal, but the pressure drops are still happening." Robert nodded, eyes on his tablet, as data started flowing in. Maya was already opening the ventilator's housing, examining the internal components with a pen light. Ethan stood back, watching both of them work, trying to understand their process. "Pressure sensor is reading clean," Maya said. "Flow valve is within spec," Robert added. "But look at this." He turned the tablet so Maya could see. "The drops are happening at irregular intervals, not mechanical failure, something's triggering it." They worked in tandem, ruling out possibilities, testing components, following a diagnostic tree that was clearly well rehearsed. Ethan watched and tried to learn, but more than that, he watched the machine itself, the way it cycled, the slight delay between the alarm and the pressure drop, the pattern that wasn't quite random. "It's environmental," he said. Robert didn't look up. "What?" "The trigger. It's not the machine. It's something in the environment." Ethan stepped closer. "Can I see the error log timestamps?" Robert hesitated, then handed over the clipboard. Ethan scanned the times, looking for the pattern he'd felt more than seen. "The drops happen every 12 to 15 minutes, he said. "Not mechanical cycling, something external affecting the sensors." "The sensors test fine," Robert said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "They test fine in isolation. What if something's interfering with them intermittently?" Ethan looked around the room. What else is in here? What other equipment? The supervisor frowned. Just the standard room setup. Monitor, IV pump, the usual. When was the IV pump installed? Last week. We got a batch of new ones from another vendor. Maya and Robert exchanged a look. Maya grabbed a device from the hard case, some kind of electromagnetic sensor, and started scanning the area around the ventilator. When she got close to the IV pump, the reading spiked. Electromagnetic interference, she said. The IV pump is generating a field that's affecting the ventilator's pressure sensors. Robert ran another diagnostic, this time with the IV pump unplugged. The reading stayed stable. No pressure drops, no alarms. He looked at Ethan with an expression that was half impressed, half annoyed. How did you know? I didn't. I guessed. But the pattern didn't make sense for mechanical failure. It was too irregular, but also too consistent. Had to be external. Robert made a note on his tablet, then turned to the supervisor. You'll need to either return those IV pumps or relocate them. They're not properly shielded. We can give you the technical specs to send to the vendor. I can do that. The supervisor looked relieved. So the ventilator's fine? Ventilator's fine. Just keep it away from that IV pump. Robert started packing up his equipment. We'll file the report. You should have documentation by end of day. They packed up in silence and headed back to the van. Ethan could feel the shift in atmosphere, the way Robert and Maya were processing what had just happened. He'd solved the problem they'd been circling, and he'd done it by thinking differently than they did. Once they were back in the van, Maya spoke first. That was good work. Thanks. Robert said nothing, just started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. They drove for 5 minutes before he finally broke the silence. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who didn't know what they were doing. Someone Victoria hired to make herself feel better about almost dying. Robert glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. I wasn't expecting someone who could actually do the job. So I passed the test? You passed one test. We'll see about the rest. But there was less hostility in Robert's voice now, replaced by something that might eventually become respect. They stopped for coffee on the way back to the office, and this time when Maya and Robert talked shop, they included Ethan in the conversation. Small questions at first, feeling out what he knew and didn't know, then gradually expanding as they realized he could keep up even when he didn't understand all the technical jargon. You really learned all this fixing cars? Maya asked. Cars, trucks, some small engines, anything mechanical that needed fixing. Ethan stirred sugar into his coffee. The principles are the same. Figure out what's supposed to happen, figure out what's actually happening, find the gap. Most of our techs think in terms of diagnostics and specifications, Robert said. They're good at following the manual, but when the manual doesn't cover it, they get stuck. Manuals are written by people who already know the answer. When you don't know the answer, you have to think different. Robert nodded slowly. Victoria said you think in terms of results instead of protocols. I didn't get it until now. I still think she hired you because you saved her life, Maya said. But maybe that wasn't the only reason. They got back to the office at 11. Robert filed the service report while Maya cleaned and restocked the equipment. Ethan helped where he could, learning their organization system, asking questions that probably seemed basic but that Robert answered with increasing patience. At noon, Jennifer appeared in the doorway. Ethan, Ms. Hale wants to see you. Robert looked up. You in trouble already? Probably. But when Ethan got to Victoria's office, she was smiling. Robert called me, said you solved the county general problem in about 10 minutes. I got lucky, noticed a pattern. He also said you did it without stepping on anyone's toes or acting like you had all the answers. That's harder than solving the problem. Victoria gestured for him to sit. How are you feeling about the work? Terrified but functional. Good. That's exactly where I need you. She pulled up something on her computer. We have a situation developing. Mercy General, where I had my surgery, is reporting issues with 3 of our patient monitors. They're critical care units, so we can't have them going down. I'm sending Robert's team tomorrow, and I want you to lead the call. Ethan's stomach dropped. I've been here one day. I can't lead. You can and you will. Robert will be there for technical support, but I want you making the decisions, talking to the hospital staff, figuring out what's actually wrong versus what they think is wrong. Victoria's expression was firm. This is the job, Ethan, not observation. Action. What if I mess it up? Then we'll fix it. But I don't think you will. She closed her laptop. You've been fixing things your whole life. This is just a different kind of problem. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways he wasn't qualified, but he could see in Victoria's face that the decision was made. She wasn't asking, she was telling. Okay, he said, I'll do it. I know you will. He spent the rest of the afternoon with Robert and Maya, learning everything he could about patient monitors and common failure modes and hospital protocols. Robert walked him through the documentation process, the importance of clear communication with medical staff, the balance between fixing things fast and fixing them right. The doctors are going to ask questions you don't know how to answer, Robert said. Don't bullshit them. If you don't know, say you don't know and tell them you'll find out. They're going to trust me even less than you did this morning. Probably. But you're representing Hale Industries, and our reputation is solid. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt until you prove you don't deserve it. Robert handed him a 3-ring binder. This is the field manual. Everything you need to know about patient monitors is in here. Read it tonight. Ethan took the binder, which had to weigh 5 pounds. All of it? You don't need to memorize it. Just know where to find information when you need it. Robert almost smiled. You'll do fine. You think like a mechanic, and sometimes that's exactly what medical equipment needs. Maya walked Ethan out to his truck when the day finally ended. Robert doesn't give compliments easy. If he says you'll do fine, he means it. I'm still terrified. That's good. Means you care about doing it right. She leaned against his truck. Can I give you some advice? Please. The hospital staff are going to see your work boots and your lack of credentials and assume you don't know anything. Let them. Then prove them wrong by fixing their problem. It's easier to exceed low expectations than to meet high ones. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Maya shrugged. I'm a 26-year-old woman working in a field dominated by men twice my age. I've had to prove myself every single day for 3 years. You get used to it. Does it ever get easier? No, but you get better at it. She pushed off from the truck. See you tomorrow, 7 sharp. The drive home gave Ethan time to think about what he'd gotten himself into. One day on the job, and Victoria was already putting him in charge of service calls. Either she had tremendous faith in him, or she was setting him up to fail spectacularly. He wasn't sure which option scared him more. Jake was home when Ethan walked in, sitting at the kitchen table with his calculus book, and looking frustrated enough that Ethan could see it from across the room. Rough day? Ethan asked. Patterson gave me a D on the quiz, said my work was sloppy, even though I got the right answers. Let me see. Jake slid the quiz across the table. Ethan looked at it, at the red marks covering his son's work, at the comments about showing more steps and explaining reasoning. The math itself was beyond Ethan's understanding, but he could see the frustration bleeding through in Jake's handwriting. Your answers are right, though? Yeah, but apparently that's not good enough. I need to explain every single step like I'm teaching someone else how to do it. Jake snatched the quiz back. It's bullshit. If I get to the right answer, why does it matter how I got there? Maybe he wants to make sure you understand the process, not just the result. Or maybe he wants to find reasons to give me bad grades so I'll drop out of his class. Ethan sat down across from his son. You really think that's what this is? I don't know, Dad. Maybe. Maybe I'm just not smart enough for this class, and everyone's too polite to say it. Stop. Ethan's voice was sharp enough that Jake looked up. You are smart enough. One bad quiz doesn't change that, and if Patterson's got a problem with your work, we'll deal with it. But you don't give up. Easy for you to say. Is it? Because I'm about to lead a service call tomorrow at a hospital, even though I've been at this job exactly 1 day. You think I feel qualified? You think I'm not terrified I'm going to screw it up in front of everyone? Ethan leaned forward. But I'm doing it anyway. Because sometimes you don't get to wait until you feel ready. You just do the thing and figure it out as you go. Jake was quiet for a moment. How was your day? Terrifying. I fixed a problem and probably surprised a couple people who thought I was dead weight. See? You're already doing the thing. Yeah, and tomorrow I'm doing it again, except this time I'm in charge. Ethan grabbed the field manual from his bag. So we're both going to study tonight. You do your calculus, I'll read about patient monitors, and we'll both try not to panic about whether we're good enough. Jake almost smiled. Deal. They worked in silence for a while, the apartment filled with the quiet sounds of pages turning and pencils scratching. At some point, Jake made ramen for both of them, and they ate while studying, falling into the rhythm they'd built over years of figuring things out together. At 10, Jake closed his calculus book. "I'm going to bed. Good luck tomorrow." "You too. Show Patterson you belong in that class." "I'll try." After Jake disappeared into his room, Ethan kept reading. The field manual was dense and technical, filled with diagrams and specifications that took multiple readings to understand. But underneath all the jargon, it was still just machines. Things with components that could fail, connections that could come loose, sensors that could malfunction. Different than cars, but not fundamentally different. He read until his eyes burned and the words started blurring together. Then he read for another hour, trying to cram as much information into his brain as it would hold. When he finally gave up and went to bed, it was past midnight, and his alarm was set for 5:30 again. Tomorrow he'd be in charge. Tomorrow he'd have to prove that Victoria's faith in him wasn't misplaced. Tomorrow he'd walk into a hospital and try to solve problems he barely understood with tools he was still learning to use. But tonight, lying in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of his apartment building settling around him, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not confidence, exactly. More like possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, he was building something that could actually last. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Victoria. "Stop overthinking it. You've got this." Ethan smiled in the darkness and typed back, "How did you know I was overthinking it?" "Because I do the same thing. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tomorrow would be terrifying. Tomorrow would be another test he wasn't sure he could pass. But he'd show up anyway, same way he always did. The alarm went off at 5:30, and Ethan was already awake, staring at the ceiling, running through every scenario where today could go sideways. The field manual sat on his nightstand, pages dog-eared from last night's cramming session. His brain felt stuffed with information it didn't know how to organize yet. He showered, put on the cleanest of his thrift store button-downs, and found Jake already in the kitchen eating cereal. "You're up early," Ethan said. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the Patterson thing." Jake looked up, took in his father's appearance. "You look like you're going to a funeral." "I feel like I'm going to one. Mine." "You'll be fine, Dad. You always figure it out." Ethan wished he had half his son's confidence in him. He grabbed coffee, skipped breakfast because his stomach was too tight to handle food, and headed out into the pre-dawn cold. The drive to the city was becoming familiar now, which should have been comforting but somehow made everything feel more real. This wasn't a one-time thing anymore. This was his life now. Robert and Maya were already loading the van when Ethan arrived. Maya handed him a coffee without comment, and Robert passed him a tablet loaded with the service call details. 3 patient monitors in the ICU, Robert said, all showing intermittent display failures. The head nurse called it in as critical because they need those monitors functional for post-surgical patients. "What's the usual failure mode for display issues?" Ethan asked, scrolling through the information. "Could be anything: power supply, connection fault, software glitch, physical damage to the screen." Maya climbed into the passenger seat. "Sometimes it's user error and they just need a reset." "You're hoping for user error," Robert said, starting the engine, "but it's never user error." They drove through morning traffic that was just starting to build. Ethan kept reading the service notes, trying to absorb everything, trying to look like he knew what he was doing. His phone buzzed, a text from Jake. "Kick ass today. Don't let them see you sweat." Ethan smiled and pocketed the phone. 16 years old and giving pep talks. When had his kid gotten so grown up? Mercy General looked different in daylight than it had the night he'd been here visiting Victoria. Less intimidating somehow. Just another building full of people trying to do difficult work. The ICU was on the 4th floor, and the head nurse who met them at the station looked like she hadn't slept in about 36 hours. "Thank you for coming so fast. We've got patients on those monitors. We can't move to other units." She was in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back severe and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything at least twice. "I'm Diane Kepler. I run this unit." "Ethan Cole. This is Robert Chen and Maya Santos. We'll get your monitors working." Diane studied him for a moment, and Ethan could see the assessment happening. Work boots, young face, no obvious credentials. He saw the moment she decided to give him a chance anyway, probably because she didn't have better options. This way. The 3 monitors were in separate rooms, all showing the same symptom. The displays would work fine for anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, then flicker and go dark for 30 seconds to a minute before coming back. Patients were still connected, still being monitored, but the nursing staff had to watch for the failures and manually check vitals during the blackout periods. "When did this start?" Robert asked, already pulling diagnostic equipment from his case. 2 days ago. 1 monitor at first, then the other 2 yesterday. Our maintenance team checked the power connections, tried rebooting them. No change. Maya was examining the first monitor, running her hands along the connections, checking for physical damage. Robert had his tablet out, pulling up the technical specs. Ethan stood back and watched, trying to see the pattern. "They're all the same model?" he asked. "Yes. We got 6 of them installed about a month ago. These 3 are having problems, the other 3 are fine." "What's different about these 3? Diane frowned. "What do you mean?" "Location, patient type, anything. If 3 are failing and 3 are fine, something's different about the failing ones. They're all in the ICU, same type of patients, same power grid, same everything." But Ethan was looking at the rooms now, comparing them visually. 2 of the failing monitors were in rooms on the east side of the building. The 3rd was on the west side, but near a window. The 3 working monitors were in interior rooms with no windows. "Is there construction happening nearby?" he asked. Diane blinked. "Across the street. They're putting up a new office building. Been going on for weeks." "What time do they start working?" 7, usually. Sometimes earlier." She paused. "The failures started happening around the same time the construction did." Robert looked up from his tablet, understanding dawning on his face. "Electromagnetic interference. Same thing as County General. Different source." Maya was already moving, pulling out the EM sensor. She scanned the area around the first monitor, and sure enough, the reading spiked near the window. Construction equipment. Probably something big, like a crane or a pile driver. The signal's intermittent because the equipment cycles on and off. "The monitors aren't shielded well enough to handle that level of interference," Robert said. He turned to Ethan. "Good catch. How did you see it so fast?" "The windows. Everything else was the same except the windows." Ethan looked at Diane. "We can relocate the monitors to interior rooms, or we can add additional shielding. Relocation is faster. We can't move the patients that easily. 2 of them just had major surgery." "Then we shield." Robert was already making notes. "We'll need to get materials from the main office. Maya and I can do the install this afternoon." "How long will that take?" Diane asked. "Few hours, maybe. We'll work around your patient care schedule." Diane nodded, relief visible on her face. "Thank you. When maintenance couldn't figure it out, I was worried we'd be dealing with this for days." "Not days," Ethan said. "We'll have it fixed today." After Diane left to coordinate the patient care schedule, Robert looked at Ethan with an expression that might have been grudging respect. 2 calls, 2 environmental interference problems. You've got a knack for this. Or I'm just lucky. Luck runs out, skill doesn't. Robert packed up his diagnostic gear. "Maya and I will head back to the office, get the shielding materials. You should stay here, coordinate with the nursing staff, make sure they know what we're doing and why." It was a test, Ethan realized. Robert was leaving him alone with the hospital staff to see if he could handle it. "Okay, when should I expect you back?" 2 hours, give or take. They left, and Ethan was alone in the ICU, with machines beeping and nurses moving efficiently between rooms. He found Diane at the nursing station, charting on a computer that looked older than Jake. "My team's getting supplies. They'll be back in a couple hours to do the shielding install." "Good. I'll make sure the rooms are clear when they're ready to work." Diane glanced up at him. "You're new at this, aren't you?" "No point in lying. Is it that obvious?" "You've got the look. Like you're waiting for someone to figure out you don't belong here." She smiled, not unkindly. "I had the same look my first year as head nurse. Kept thinking someone would realize I was too young, too inexperienced, too whatever." "How'd you get past it?" "Stopped waiting for permission to know what I was doing, started just doing it." She went back to her charting. "You solved our problem in about 10 minutes. That's better than the last 3 service techs who came through here. So maybe you belong here more than you think." The words settled in Ethan's chest. Not quite belief, but something adjacent to it. He spent the next 2 hours learning the ICU's rhythms, talking to nurses about the monitors and what other equipment gave them problems. One nurse mentioned that their medication dispensers were acting up. Another said the portable X-ray machine had been making a weird noise for a week. Ethan made notes on his phone, filing away information he didn't know what to do with yet, but figured might matter later. When Robert and Maya returned with the shielding materials, he was ready with a schedule that would let them work around patient care without disrupting anything critical. "You've been busy," Maya observed, looking at the schedule he'd worked out with Diane. Seemed like a good use of time. They spent the next 3 hours installing electromagnetic shielding around the 3 failing monitors. It was delicate work, requiring them to work around patients who were connected to multiple machines, and IV's Ethan mostly stayed out of the way. But when they needed an extra pair of hands to hold equipment or test connections, he was there. By 4 in the afternoon, all 3 monitors were working perfectly. No flickers, no blackouts, just steady displays showing vital signs that looked appropriately boring. Diane inspected their work with the thoroughness of someone who'd learned not to trust easy solutions. "This is good. Really good." She signed off on the service report Robert handed her. "You'll be back if we have more problems. We're on call whenever you need us," Ethan said. "And if you notice anything else acting weird, call before it becomes critical. Easier to fix problems early." On the drive back to the office, Maya was quiet for a while before finally speaking. "You were good with the nursing staff. They actually liked you. Why wouldn't they? Most techs treat hospital staff like they're in the way. You treated them like they were part of the team. They're part of the team. They're the ones who have to live with the equipment after we leave." Robert glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Victoria made the right call putting you in the field. You see things different than we do. Different doesn't always mean better. In this case, it does." Robert pulled into the Hale Industries parking garage. "You should write up the service report. You led the call. You should document it." Back at the field operations office, Ethan struggled through writing his first official report. The format was nothing like anything he'd done before. All corporate language and technical specifications. Maya helped him translate his observations into proper terminology, and Robert checked it over for accuracy. "Not bad for a first try," Robert said, sending the report through the system. "You'll get faster with practice." Ethan's phone buzzed. "Victoria. Heard the Mercy General call went well. My office tomorrow at 10? He texted back. "I'll be there." The drive home felt different than it had the past few days. Less like he was escaping and more like he was just transitioning between the different parts of his life. He stopped at the grocery store and actually bought fresh vegetables instead of his usual rotation of cheap processed foods. When he got home, Jake was at the kitchen table with his calculus book and an expression that suggested the war with Patterson was ongoing. "How'd it go?" Jake asked. "Good. Fixed the problem. Didn't embarrass myself. Might actually know what I'm doing." Ethan started unpacking groceries. "You?" "Patterson gave me extra homework because apparently my quiz answers weren't detailed enough. I have to redo every problem and show every single step." "That's not actually bad advice, though. Showing your work helps you catch mistakes." Jake gave him a look. "Whose side are you on?" "Yours, always. But maybe Patterson has a point about the process mattering." Ethan pulled out a cutting board. "I'm making actual dinner tonight. Not pizza, not ramen, real food." "Who are you, and what did you do with my dad?" "I got paid today. Direct deposit. We can afford vegetables for once." They cooked together, Jake reading out recipe instructions from his phone, while Ethan chopped vegetables and tried not to cut himself. It was domestic and normal and exactly what Ethan needed after the intensity of the day. When they sat down to eat, actual chicken and vegetables and rice that wasn't from a box, it felt like something had shifted. "This is pretty good," Jake said, surprised. "Don't sound so shocked. I can cook when I have time and ingredients." "You haven't had either of those things in a while." "No, I haven't." Ethan looked at his son across the table. "But maybe that's changing." Later, after Jake disappeared into his room to tackle the Patterson homework, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and thought about the past week. 7 days ago, he was working for Gary Miller, barely making rent, convinced his life was a closed loop of work and worry, and trying to keep things from falling apart. Now he was working for a billionaire, leading service calls, making enough money to buy vegetables. It was too fast. Too good. The kind of thing that had to come with a catch. His phone rang. Unknown number, but Ethan answered anyway. Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Richard Patterson from Lincoln High School. Ethan's stomach dropped. Is Jake okay? He's fine. I'm calling about his performance in my AP Calculus class. Patterson's voice had that particular tone teachers used when they were about to deliver bad news. I wanted to discuss some concerns I have about his placement. What kind of concerns? Jake is a bright student, but I'm not convinced he has the mathematical maturity for a P-level work. His quiz scores have been inconsistent, and his problem-solving approach lacks the rigor I expect from my students. Ethan thought about his son sitting at the kitchen table night after night, working through problems that Ethan couldn't begin to understand. He's pulling a B in your class. That seems like he's handling it. A B-, and I'm worried he's going to fall further behind as the material gets more complex. I think he'd be better served in the regular calculus track. What does Jake think about this? I haven't spoken with him yet. I wanted to discuss it with you first, parent to parent. Something about the way Patterson said it made Ethan's teeth clench. Let me be clear, Dr. Patterson. Jake wants to stay in your class. He's working his ass off to stay in your class. And unless you can give me a reason beyond he doesn't solve problems the way I want him to, I don't see why he should drop. Mr. Cole, I understand you want what's best for your son. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've decided Jake doesn't belong in your class, and you're looking for justification. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Patterson spoke again, his voice was colder. I'm trying to be realistic about Jake's capabilities. Not every student is cut out for advanced mathematics. And you decided that based on what? A couple of quizzes? Ethan stood up, too angry to sit still. Here's what I know about my kid. He's smarter than I'll ever be. He works harder than anyone I know. And when someone tells him he can't do something, he does it anyway just to prove them wrong. So no, he's not dropping your class. He's going to stay, and he's going to pass, and you're going to grade his work fairly instead of looking for reasons to push him out. Mr. Cole, we're done here. If you have concerns about Jake's work, talk to Jake. Don't call me looking for permission to give up on him. Ethan hung up before Patterson could respond. His hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding his system the same way it had when he'd walked out on Gary. He stood in his kitchen, breathing hard, wondering if he'd just made things worse for Jake. A sound made him turn. Jake stood in the hallway, phone in hand, eyes wide. You heard that? Ethan asked. Most of it. Patterson called you? Yeah. Wanted to suggest you drop his class. What did you tell him? That you're staying and he can deal with it. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I might have been a little harsh. If that makes things harder for you. Jake crossed the room and hugged him. Just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his father like he was 8 years old again instead of 16. Thanks, Dad. Ethan hugged back, throat tight. You're sure you want to stay in that class? Yeah, I'm sure, and you're right. I'm going to pass just to prove Patterson wrong. That's my kid. They stayed like that for a moment, and Ethan thought about all the ways he'd failed as a father over the years. The late nights working, the birthdays celebrated with gas station cupcakes because it was all he could afford, the homework he couldn't help with because he didn't understand it. But maybe this was what mattered. Not being perfect, just being there. Standing up for his kid when someone tried to count him out. Jake pulled back, wiping his eyes quickly. I should finish that homework. Show Patterson what detailed work actually looks like. Go for it. Ethan cleaned up the dinner dishes, mind still churning from the Patterson call. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Victoria. Everything okay? Robert said you did excellent work today. Yeah, all good, led the call, fixed the problem, learned a lot. That's what I like to hear. See you tomorrow at 10. We need to talk about your next assignment. Ethan stared at the message. Next assignment. Because apparently this was his life now. Service calls and corporate meetings and navigating a world he still barely understood. He should have felt overwhelmed. Instead, he felt something like excitement. The next morning, Ethan showed up at Victoria's office at exactly 10. She was on the phone when he arrived, but gestured for him to sit. He waited while she finished the call, looking out at the city spread below them and trying not to think about how high up they were. Sorry about that. Victoria hung up and turned her attention to Ethan. Robert sent me your service reports from County General and Mercy General. 2 environmental interference problems in your first 3 days. Either you're extremely lucky or you're seeing something others aren't. Probably a little of both. I'll take it either way. She pulled up something on her computer. I want to expand your role. You've proven you can handle field calls, but I think you're capable of more. I want you to start reviewing our equipment designs from an operational perspective. I don't know anything about engineering. You know how things fail in real conditions. Our engineers design equipment in laboratories. They test it in controlled environments, but you've seen how it actually performs when a construction crane is interfering with the signal or an IV pump is generating electromagnetic noise. Victoria turned the screen so he could see. I want you to look at our new patient monitor prototype and tell me what's going to go wrong with it. Ethan looked at the design schematics, trying to make sense of the technical drawings. I wouldn't even know where to start. Start with the basics. Where are the vulnerable points? What's going to break first? What happens if someone drops it or spills coffee on it or plugs it into a faulty outlet? You want me to think about how to break it. I want you to think about how it's going to break anyway, in the real world, when someone's life depends on it working. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Our engineers are brilliant, but they design for ideal conditions. You design for reality. When do you need this? End of next week. Take your time. Be thorough. And Ethan, don't hold back. If you think something's going to fail, say so. I'd rather hear it now than after we've shipped 10,000 units. Ethan left her office with a USB drive full of design files and a growing sense that he was in over his head. But he'd felt that way walking into the Mercy General ICU, and that had turned out okay. Maybe this would too. The next week fell into a pattern. Mornings in the field with Robert and Maya, learning systems and solving problems. Afternoons at his desk, reviewing the monitor designs and making notes about potential failure points. Evenings at home with Jake, both of them studying their respective subjects and occasionally helping each other through rough patches. Jake's war with Patterson continued. The extra homework became a challenge instead of a punishment, and Jake started showing his work in such excruciating detail that his quiz answers sometimes ran 3 pages long. When Patterson returned the next quiz with a B+ and a note that said, "Better," Jake brought it home and stuck it on the refrigerator like a trophy. "He's still a dick," Jake said, "but at least he's grading me fairly now. That's all you can ask for." Ethan's review of the monitor design took the full week. He approached it the way he'd approach diagnosing a car problem, looking for weak points and failure modes. The power supply was too close to the display panel. The connection ports were positioned where liquid spills would pool. The mounting bracket wouldn't survive a drop from waist height. He documented everything, added sketches where words weren't enough, and tried not to think about the fact that he was critiquing work done by people with engineering degrees. On Friday, he brought his review to Victoria's office. She read through it slowly, making notes, occasionally asking questions that Ethan answered as best he could. When she finished, she looked up with an expression he couldn't quite read. "This is exactly what I needed." "Really?" "Because I felt like I was just pointing out problems without offering solutions. The problems are the solutions. Every issue you identified is something we can fix in the design phase instead of dealing with in the field." Victoria made a note on her tablet. "I'm forwarding this to the engineering team. They're going to want to meet with you, walk through your concerns. They're going to think I'm an idiot. They're going to think you're practical. There's a difference." She set down the tablet. "How are you feeling about the work? Honestly." Ethan considered the question. A month ago, he was fixing cars for Gary Miller. Now he was reviewing medical equipment designs and leading service calls at hospitals. It was terrifying and overwhelming and completely outside anything he'd imagined his life could be. "I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water," he admitted, "but I'm not drowning. Not yet." "Good. That's the right amount of challenge." Victoria stood, walked to the window. "I'm going to be honest with you about something. When I offered you this job, part of it was gratitude. You saved my life, and I wanted to repay that. But that's not why I'm keeping you. I'm keeping you because you're good at this, because you see things my engineers miss, because you solve problems instead of documenting them. I'm still learning. We're all still learning. The difference is whether you're learning while moving forward or learning while standing still." She turned back to face him. "I've got a question for you. How long do you want to stay in field operations?" "I don't understand." "You're currently assigned to Robert's team. You do service calls, you troubleshoot equipment, you interact with hospital staff. It's good work, important work. but I think you're capable of more. I think you could move into operational management, oversee multiple teams, develop training programs, help shape how we approach field service across the company." Ethan felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "I've been here 3 weeks, and you've solved problems, led calls, and provided insights that are already changing how we design equipment. Time served isn't the same as value added." "What about Robert? He's been here 6 years. He should be the one moving up." "Robert's excellent at what he does, but he thinks like a technician. You think like a leader." Victoria sat back down. "I'm not asking you to decide today. Just think about it. See if it's something you'd want." Ethan drove home in a daze. Management, leading teams, the kind of job he'd never even considered because people like him didn't get those opportunities. Except apparently they did, or at least he did, because Victoria Hale thought he was capable of it. Jake was at the kitchen table when Ethan got home, surrounded by textbooks but clearly not studying. He looked up when his father walked in. "You look weird. What happened?" "Victoria offered me a promotion, sort of. She wants me to think about moving into management." Jake's eyes went wide. "That's amazing. Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. I've been there 3 weeks, Jake. That's not enough time to what? Prove yourself?" "Dad, you've already done that. She wouldn't offer if she didn't think you could handle it." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Jake closed his calculus book. "You keep telling me I'm smart enough for AP math even though Patterson doesn't think so. You tell me not to let other people's doubts become my doubts. Maybe take your own advice." Ethan sat down across from his son, the weight of the week settling on his shoulders. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail, but you won't know unless you try." "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just notice more now that you're not working 80 hours a week." Jake grabbed his phone. "I'm ordering pizza, the good kind, not the cheap kind." "We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" "You. Being offered a promotion 3 weeks into a new job. That's worth celebrating." They ordered pizza and spent the evening watching some action movie neither of them really cared about, just enjoying the rare moment of not having to worry about money or work or anything except being together. When Jake went to bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and thought about Victoria's offer. Management meant responsibility. It meant making decisions that affected other people's jobs and livelihoods. It meant being the person others looked to for answers, even when he didn't have them. It terrified him, but it also meant stability, better pay, the chance to build something that lasted, the opportunity to prove that a mechanic from nowhere could be more than what everyone expected. His phone buzzed, a text from Robert. "Victoria told me about the management offer. You should take it." Ethan stared at the message, confused. "Shouldn't you be mad? You've been there way longer. I'm a technician. I like fixing things, not managing people. You're good at both. The team needs someone like you." "I don't know what I'm doing. None of us do. That's the secret nobody tells you. We're all just figuring it out." Ethan set down his phone and looked around his apartment. Same peeling paint, same secondhand furniture, same life he'd been living for years. But somehow it felt different now, like maybe the walls weren't closing in quite so tight anymore. He pulled out his phone and texted Victoria. "I want to do it. The management thing. I'm terrified, but I want to try." Her response came fast. "Good. We'll talk details Monday." And Ethan, being terrified means you understand the responsibility. That's exactly the kind of person I need in that role. Ethan sat in his quiet apartment and let himself feel it. The fear, the excitement, the possibility that maybe his life was actually changing into something he'd never imagined it could be. He thought about the ambulance in the rain, about the choice that had cost him everything and given him something he hadn't known to want. Sometimes the right decision was the one that terrified you most. Sometimes you grabbed your tools and ran into the storm even when every logical part of your brain screamed at you to stay put. Sometimes you took the job you weren't qualified for and the promotion you didn't think you deserved, and you just did the work until you figured out how to be the person everyone seemed to think you already were. Ethan closed his eyes and thought about Monday, about walking into Victoria's office and saying yes to something that should have been impossible, about building a life that was more than just survival. He thought about Jake, asleep in his room, fighting his own battles with Patterson and AP calculus and the constant pressure of being the scholarship kid, about how his son needed to see that taking risks sometimes paid off, that betting on yourself wasn't always a losing proposition. The apartment was quiet except for the usual sounds, traffic outside, neighbors moving around, the constant hum of a building full of people living their own complicated lives. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt like maybe his own complicated life was heading somewhere worth going. He'd spent years just trying to keep things from falling apart. Maybe it was time to try building something instead. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold rain that made Ethan think about the day everything changed. 6 weeks ago, he'd been standing in that rain, fixing an ambulance with zip ties while his future crumbled around him. Now he was sitting in his truck outside Hale Industries, wearing a suit jacket Jake had helped him pick out from the thrift store, trying to convince himself he belonged in a management meeting. His phone buzzed. Jake, of course. Stop overthinking it. Go be a boss. Ethan smiled despite his nerves and headed inside. The elevator ride to Victoria's floor felt longer than usual, like the building was giving him extra time to panic. When Jennifer led him into the conference room, there were already 4 people seated around the table. Robert and Maya, he knew. The other 2 were strangers. Victoria entered behind him. Everyone, this is Ethan Cole. As of today, he's taking over as Director of Field Operations. The title hit Ethan like a physical thing. Director. He'd agreed to management, but somehow hearing it said out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Ethan, this is David Morse, Head of Engineering, and Linda Vasquez, VP of Operations. You'll be working closely with both of them. Victoria gestured for everyone to sit. Let's talk about what this actually means. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They discussed restructuring the field teams, implementing new training protocols, and using Ethan's equipment reviews as a template for operational testing. David Morse was skeptical at first. Ethan could see it in the way he kept referring to engineering standards and technical specifications. But when they walked through Ethan's notes on the monitor design, pointing out real-world failure modes the lab tests had missed, something shifted. These are legitimate concerns, David admitted, flipping through the documentation. We can address most of them with design modifications. The power supply relocation alone would probably prevent 30% of our field failures. How did you catch this? Linda asked Ethan. Our quality team reviewed this design for 3 months. I just thought about what would happen in a hospital. Equipment gets moved, cords get yanked, people spill coffee. Your quality team tested it in perfect conditions. I tested it in my head like it was going to County General's ICU. That's exactly the perspective we've been missing, Victoria said. Ethan, I want you to establish an operational review process. Before any new equipment goes into production, your team tests it like it's going into the worst possible environment. We find the problems before our customers do. Robert was nodding. We've been reactive for too long, fixing problems after they happen instead of preventing them. This could change that. It'll slow down our development cycle, David pointed out. Better slow than shipping equipment that fails in the field, Victoria said. Lives depend on this working right. We can afford the extra time. When the meeting finally ended, Ethan felt like his brain had been wrung out and hung up to dry. Linda caught him at the door. You look overwhelmed. Is it that obvious? You're taking over a department you didn't know existed 2 months ago. If you weren't overwhelmed, I'd be worried. She handed him a business card. My direct line. You're going to have questions. Call me. That's what I'm here for. Thanks. And Ethan, Victoria doesn't make decisions lightly. If she thinks you can do this, you probably can. The question is whether you believe it. The next 3 months were a blur of learning curves so steep they were practically vertical. Ethan built out the field operations team, hiring 2 new techs and promoting Maya to senior technician. He developed training programs based on real service calls, teaching people to think about environmental factors and failure modes instead of just following diagnostic trees. Jake's battle with Patterson reached a turning point in November. The midterm exam results came back and Jake scored a 92. Patterson wrote a note at the top of the test. Excellent work. You've proven me wrong. He actually admitted it, Jake said, showing Ethan the test with something like awe in his voice. I didn't think he was capable of admitting he was wrong. People surprise you sometimes. You think he'll write me a recommendation for college? Ethan looked at his son, at the test with its near-perfect score, at the evidence of months of hard work paying off. Yeah, I think he will. College applications became the new focus. Jake applied to 8 schools, all of them reaches, according to his guidance counselor, all of them expensive in ways that made Ethan's stomach hurt, even with his new salary. But they filled out the financial aid forms together, and Ethan tried not to think about what would happen if Jake got in somewhere they couldn't afford. In December, Victoria called Ethan into her office with an expression he'd learned to recognize as her "I have an idea" face. "We're launching a new product line in March. Advanced ventilators designed for emergency response situations. Ambulances, field hospitals, disaster zones. Makes sense given what happened to you?" "Exactly. And I want your team to stress test the prototypes, not in a lab, in actual ambulances with real paramedics, in conditions as close to emergency response as we can simulate." Ethan thought about that day in the rain, about making split-second decisions with lives on the line. "We'll need to partner with emergency services, get access to their vehicles, their protocols. Already working on it. County EMS has agreed to participate. They want equipment that can handle real-world conditions as much as we want to build it." Victoria pulled up specs on her screen. "This is personal for me, Ethan. If this equipment had existed 6 months ago, that ambulance wouldn't have broken down. I want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." "We'll make it work." The testing program took 2 months to set up. Ethan's team spent January and February riding with paramedics, learning their workflows, understanding what they needed equipment to do, and what actually got in the way. Maya nearly threw up on her first ride-along to a car accident. Robert discovered he had a talent for teaching paramedics about equipment maintenance, and Ethan found himself back in ambulances, except this time he was helping design the solutions instead of improvising them with zip ties. In late February, Jake got his first acceptance letter. State University, full ride scholarship. He came home waving the letter like a flag, grinning so wide Ethan thought his face might crack. "Full ride, Dad. Full ride. I don't have to pay anything." Ethan grabbed his son and hugged him so hard Jake wheezed. "I'm so proud of you. Patterson wrote me a recommendation. Guess it was a good one. You earned it, every bit of it." They celebrated with the expensive pizza Jake had threatened to order months ago, and Ethan thought about how far they'd come. From ramen and day-old bread to celebrating college acceptances. From barely making rent to actually having savings in the bank. From survival to something that felt almost like thriving. The ventilator launch in March was the biggest project Ethan had led. His team had identified and fixed 17 potential failure points, and the final product was something he actually felt good about putting his name on. The launch event was at a hotel downtown, full of people in suits and emergency services personnel and press coverage that made Ethan deeply uncomfortable. Victoria gave a speech about innovation and safety and the importance of equipment that worked when lives depended on it. Then she introduced Ethan as the director who'd made it possible, and he had to stand up in front of 200 people and talk about stress testing and operational review and all the work his team had done. He kept it short, talked about the paramedics they'd partnered with, the real-world testing that had made the difference, the team effort that had gone into every design decision. When he sat down, Victoria was smiling. "You're getting better at this. I'm getting better at faking it. That's 90% of leadership right there." After the event, as people milled around examining the equipment and asking technical questions, a woman approached Ethan. She looked familiar, and it took him a moment to place her. The paramedic from that rainy day. The one who'd been on the phone panicking about the dying ambulance. "You probably don't remember me," she said. "I do, actually. You were driving. Sarah Chen. I never got to properly thank you for what you did that day. We would have lost her if you hadn't fixed that ambulance." "I heard she made it." "More than made it. She's standing right over there." Sarah gestured across the room, and Ethan followed her gaze to where Victoria was talking with a group of EMS directors. "She built all this because of what happened, and you made it possible. I just fixed a belt. You made a choice. You put someone else's life ahead of your own security. That's not nothing." Sarah handed him her card. "County EMS is expanding our training program. We're looking for people who can teach our paramedics about equipment operation and maintenance. You interested?" "I don't know the first thing about teaching." "You know about equipment. You know about thinking on your feet. The rest we can figure out." She smiled. "Think about it. We could use someone who understands what it's like out there." Ethan pocketed the card and watched Sarah walk away. Teaching. Another thing he'd never imagined himself doing. Another door opening that he hadn't known existed 6 months ago. Victoria found him later, after most of the guests had left and the catering staff was cleaning up. You did good work on this project. The team did good work. I just coordinated it. That's what leadership is. Coordinating good people doing good work. She looked out at the display of ventilators, at the equipment that bore both their fingerprints now. You know what I think about sometimes? That ambulance breaking down might have been the best thing that ever happened to both of us. You almost died, but I didn't. And because I didn't, all this exists. Better equipment, stronger safety standards, a whole operational review process that's going to save lives. She turned to look at him. And you got a chance to be more than what your old boss thought you were capable of. I'm still figuring out what I'm capable of. Good. The day you think you know everything is the day you stop growing. April brought more college acceptances for Jake. 3 more schools, all offering decent financial aid packages, none quite as good as the state school's full ride. They spread the letters out on the kitchen table and made a pros and cons list like they were debugging a mechanical problem. State school makes the most sense financially, Jake said. But the engineering program at Northeastern is supposed to be incredible, and they're offering enough aid that I'd only need to take out about $20,000 in loans. Ethan looked at the numbers, at the loans his son would be carrying, at the opportunities each school represented. What do you want to do? I want to go where I'll learn the most, but I don't want to bury myself in debt either. You're thinking about it the right way. Both schools will give you a good education. The question is whether Northeastern's program is worth an extra $20,000 to you. Jake was quiet for a long time, staring at the letters. I think it is. The co-op program means I'd get actual work experience before graduating. That's worth something. Then that's your answer. You're sure? Ethan thought about the choices that had brought them here. Walking away from Gary's shop, taking Victoria's job offer, accepting a promotion he didn't feel qualified for, every risk that had paid off because he'd been willing to take it. I'm sure you take the opportunity that scares you a little. That's how you know it's worth doing. They called Northeastern the next day and accepted the offer. Jake would start in the fall, and Ethan would figure out how to deal with the reality of his son being 500 miles away. One problem at a time. In May, Ethan got a call from Gary Miller. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Cole, heard you're doing pretty well for yourself these days. I'm doing okay. What do you need, Gary? Nothing. Just wanted to say I might have been wrong about you. Firing you was probably a mistake. Ethan waited for the punchline, the request for money or a job or some kind of favor. When it didn't come, he realized Gary was actually apologizing in his own terrible way. Appreciate you saying that. You still know how to fix cars. Haven't forgotten. Good, because I'm thinking about selling the shop, and I wanted to offer you first right of refusal. You could buy it, run it your way, make it into something. For a moment, Ethan let himself imagine it. Owning Miller's Auto, renaming it, building something of his own. But the image didn't fit anymore. He'd outgrown that life, grown into something he was still figuring out, but that felt more right than going backward ever could. Thanks for the offer, Gary, but I'm good where I am. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. Good luck, Cole. You too. Ethan hung up and looked around his apartment. They'd be moving soon. A bigger place closer to the city, something with a second bedroom that could be Jake's when he came home from college. Another change? Another step forward. It still felt surreal sometimes, like he'd wake up and discover the past 7 months had been a dream, and he was still fixing cars for minimum wage. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, built on choices and risks, and the willingness to grab his tools and run into the rain when it mattered. June brought the operational review team's 6-month assessment. Ethan's protocols had reduced field failures by 43% and cut average repair times by nearly a third. Victoria presented the numbers to the board of directors, and Ethan sat in the meeting trying not to think about how many of those board members probably made more in a month than he'd made in his entire life before this job. The operational review process has exceeded our projections, Victoria told the board. We're catching design flaws before production, reducing warranty claims, and most importantly, we're building equipment that actually works in the conditions our customers face. I'm recommending we expand the program to cover all product lines, not just emergency equipment. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair and an expression that suggested he'd heard every pitch 1,000 times, looked directly at Ethan. This was your program, Mr. Cole? My team's program, yes, sir. And you came to this company with no background in medical equipment? No formal background, no. I was a mechanic before this. Interesting. The man made a note. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who don't know the rules well enough to be limited by them. Good work. After the meeting, Linda caught up with Ethan in the hallway. That was Harrison Westfield. He rarely gives compliments. You impressed him. I just presented the data. You presented results. That's what he cares about. She paused. There's talk about creating a VP of Operational Excellence position. Someone to oversee not just field operations, but all operational processes across the company. If it happens, you should apply. I've been here 7 months. And in 7 months, you've built a program that's saving the company millions and improving patient outcomes. Time served doesn't matter. Results do. Ethan thought about it as he drove home that evening. VP of Operational Excellence. 2 promotions in less than a year. It should have felt impossible, but after everything else that had happened, impossible had started to feel more like a dare than a limitation. Jake's graduation was in mid-June, a sweltering afternoon in the high school gymnasium with 400 sweating families watching their kids walk across a stage. Ethan sat in the bleachers and watched his son accept his diploma, watched him shake Patterson's hand. Patterson, who'd tried to push Jake out and ended up writing him a recommendation instead. After the ceremony, Jake found him in the crowd. We did it. You did it. I just kept you fed and mostly on time for school. You did more than that. Jake handed him the diploma. This belongs to both of us. They went out for dinner at a place that actually required reservations, the kind of restaurant Ethan used to drive past and never imagine eating at. Over steaks that cost more than he used to spend on groceries for a week, Jake talked about college plans and engineering classes and the future that was opening up in front of him. You think I'll be able to handle it? Jake asked. College? You handled Patterson. You can handle anything. I'm serious, Dad. So am I. You spent a year proving you belonged in a class everyone said was too hard for you. You're going to spend 4 years doing the same thing at Northeastern, and you're going to be great at it. What if I fail? Ethan thought about all the times he'd asked himself that question over the past 7 months. What if he failed at the new job, at management, at leading teams and making decisions that affected other people's lives? He'd been terrified every step of the way, and he'd done it anyway. Then you fail, and you learn from it, and you try again. That's all any of us can do. He raised his glass. To taking risks that scare us. Jake clinked his glass against Ethan's. To taking risks that scare us. In July, Ethan was officially offered the VP position. He took 3 days to think about it, talking it over with Jake, with Robert and Maya, with Linda, who'd suggested it in the first place. Everyone told him he was crazy not to take it, so he did. The promotion came with a salary that made him check the offer letter 3 times to make sure there wasn't a decimal point error. It came with an office on the executive floor, a parking spot with his name on it, and responsibilities that terrified him in the best possible way. On his first day as VP, Victoria met him at his new office with a bottle of champagne. We're not drinking this at 9 in the morning, Ethan said. No, but you can take it home and celebrate properly tonight. She set it on his desk. I knew you'd end up here. Maybe not this fast, but eventually. I still don't know what I'm doing half the time. None of us do. That's the secret. We're all just making educated guesses and hoping they work out. She sat in one of his guest chairs. Can I tell you something? That day in the hospital when I offered you this job, I wasn't completely sure you'd be able to do it. I knew you had the instincts, the problem-solving ability, the courage to make hard choices. But I didn't know if you'd be able to translate that into this environment. And now? Now I know you can do things I can't. You see problems from angles I miss. You connect with people in ways I struggle with. You've built something here that's making this company better. She stood. I saved your life by surviving. You saved mine by fixing that ambulance. I'd say we're even now. You gave me a chance when no one else would have. We're not even close to even. Then let's just call it a partnership and leave it at that. August brought Jake's departure for college. They loaded everything he owned into the truck, which Ethan had finally replaced with something newer that didn't burn oil, and drove the 500 miles to Boston. The dorm was a cramped room on the 7th floor that Jake would share with a roommate from California who seemed nice enough but talked too much. When it was time to leave, Ethan stood in the parking lot with his son and tried not to think about how quiet the apartment would be. "You going to be okay?" Jake asked. "That's my line. I'm serious. You've spent 16 years taking care of me. What are you going to do when I'm not there?" Ethan thought about it. The empty apartment, the dinners for one, the absence of calculus homework on the kitchen table. It would be lonely, but it would also be proof that he'd done his job right, raised a kid who was ready to go out and build his own life. "I'm going to be fine. Better than fine. I'm going to miss you like crazy, but I'm going to be proud of you every single day." Jake hugged him hard. "Thanks for not giving up. On me, on yourself, on any of it. Thanks for making it worth it." The drive home was long and quiet. Ethan stopped halfway at a rest area and called Victoria. "How'd it go?" she asked. "He's moved in. He's excited. I'm a mess." "That's parenting. You did good, Ethan." "Yeah, I think I did." September brought a rhythm Ethan had to learn from scratch. Living alone for the first time since Jake was born. Coming home to an empty apartment. Making dinner for one. But it also brought freedom, time to read, to think, to figure out who he was outside of being someone's father. He took Sarah Chen up on her offer and started teaching monthly classes for county EMS paramedics. Basic equipment, troubleshooting, field repairs, thinking creatively when the manual didn't have answers. The paramedics were skeptical at first, another corporate guy telling them how to do their jobs. But when Ethan showed them the zip tie fix he'd used on Victoria's ambulance, they started paying attention. "You actually did that?" one of them asked. "Didn't have a choice. It was improvise or let her die." "They teach that kind of thinking in your company?" "They do now. That's the whole point of operational review. Figure out what's going to break and how to fix it when the perfect solution isn't available." The classes became popular enough that other EMS agencies started asking for the same training. By October, Ethan was teaching twice a month, and Victoria was talking about making it an official partnership between Hale Industries and emergency services across the state. Jake called every Sunday without fail. His classes were hard but manageable. His roommate was annoying but tolerable. He joined an engineering club and was working on a project to design more efficient solar panels. He sounded happy, challenged, alive in ways that made Ethan's chest hurt with pride. "How's work?" Jake asked during one of their calls. "Good. Busy. We're rolling out the operational review program to all product lines. Turns out preventing problems is popular with customers." "Who would have thought?" Jake laughed. "You hear from Gary at all?" "He sold the shop, retired to Florida or somewhere. I don't really keep track." "Good. He was always an asshole." "True. But if he hadn't fired me, none of this would have happened. So maybe I owe him one." "You don't owe him anything, Dad. You made this happen. You grabbed your tools and ran into the rain, remember?" Ethan did remember. That moment of decision, standing in Gary's shop with the choice between security and doing the right thing. It had felt like the end of everything. It had actually been the beginning. In November, Ethan went back to Mercy General for a routine equipment inspection. He ran into Diane Kepler in the ICU, and she greeted him like an old friend. "Ethan, the monitors are still working perfectly. Whatever shielding your team installed must have been good." "That's what we do. Fix things so they stay fixed." "You know, you changed how we think about equipment maintenance here. We used to just call when something broke. Now we do preventive reviews, catch problems early. It's made a real difference." "That's good to hear." Diane hesitated, then said, "I never properly thanked you for that day with Ms. Hale. If that ambulance hadn't made it, we wouldn't have been able to save her. You made a choice that mattered. I made a choice that cost me my job and got you a better one. Funny how that works sometimes." Walking out of Mercy General that day, Ethan thought about all the ripple effects from one decision made in the rain. Victoria surviving, building new equipment, creating programs that were saving lives. His own life transforming in ways he never could have imagined. Jake getting opportunities Ethan never had. All of it stemming from 30 seconds of zip ties and determination. Maybe that was the thing about doing the right thing. You didn't do it for the reward. You did it because someone needed help, and you could provide it. But sometimes, if you were lucky, the universe gave you something back anyway. December marked 1 year since Ethan had walked out of Gary's shop. He spent the anniversary having dinner with Victoria and some of the team, Robert, Maya, Linda, David from engineering, who'd stopped being skeptical months ago. They toasted to operational excellence and equipment that worked, and the importance of thinking different. Speech, Maya demanded. I'm not giving a speech. You're a VP now. Speeches are mandatory. Ethan stood reluctantly, looking around the table at people who'd become more than colleagues. A year ago, I was unemployed, broke, and convinced I'd ruin my life by making a stupid decision in the rain. I fixed an ambulance and lost everything. Except I didn't lose everything. I just lost the things that were holding me back from becoming who I was supposed to be. That's actually pretty good, Robert said. I'm not finished. What I learned this year is that sometimes the scariest choice is the right one. Sometimes you grab your tools and run into the storm, even when everyone tells you to stay safe. Sometimes you take the job you're not qualified for and the promotion you don't deserve, and you just do the work until you figure out how to be the person everyone thinks you already are. He raised his glass. To making scary choices. And to all of you for making me look good while I figure things out. They drank to that, and Ethan sat down feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight he'd carried for so long, the weight of survival, of just barely making it, of being one paycheck away from disaster, had finally lifted. He wasn't rich. He wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes and doubted himself, and occasionally woke up at 3 a.m. wondering if this was all a dream. But he was building something that mattered. He was helping people. He was teaching his son that taking risks was worth it, that betting on yourself could pay off, that sometimes the right decision was the terrifying one. Jake came home for winter break in late December, and they moved into the new apartment together. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen where more than one person could stand at a time, windows that actually opened. It felt enormous after years in the old place. This is nice, Dad. It's not bad. You did good. Really good. Jake looked around the empty living room. We need furniture, though. We'll get furniture. Real furniture. Not stuff from the curb. They spent the week furnishing the apartment, picking out a couch and chairs and a kitchen table where they could actually eat together. Jake talked about his classes and his projects, and the internship he was applying for next summer. Ethan listened and asked questions and marveled at how grown up his son had become. On New Year's Eve, they sat on their new couch eating takeout and watching the countdown on TV. When midnight came, they toasted with cheap champagne. Some things didn't change, and Ethan thought about the year that had passed and the year ahead. What's your resolution? Jake asked. To stop waiting for everything to fall apart. To believe that good things can actually last. Ethan looked at his son. What about you? To be as brave as you were. To make the scary choice when it matters. You already do that. You fought Patterson when he tried to push you out. You picked the college that scared you instead of the safe option. You're braver than you think. I learned from the best. They sat in comfortable silence as the TV played in the background and the city outside celebrated the new year. Ethan thought about everything that had changed and everything that had stayed the same. He was still a mechanic at heart, still someone who saw problems as things to fix rather than obstacles to document. He was still a father, even with Jake 500 miles away most of the year. He was still the guy who'd grabbed his tools and run into the rain. But he was also a VP at a company that mattered. A teacher helping paramedics think creatively about emergency repairs. A person building something that would outlast him. Someone who'd learned that the scariest choices were usually the right ones, and that betting on yourself was worth the risk. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Happy New Year. Thanks for taking a chance on that job offer. Best decision I made last year. Ethan typed back. Best decision I made too. Here's to making more scary choices in the new year. Always. He set down his phone and looked at Jake, who'd fallen asleep on the couch, 17 years old and on the edge of everything. Ethan grabbed a blanket and covered his son, then stood at the window looking out at the city where he'd built this new life. 1 year ago, he'd been standing in the rain, making a choice that would cost him his job and his security and everything he thought he needed. He'd done it anyway, because someone was dying and he could help. That was the only calculation that mattered in the moment. Help someone who needs it. Fix the problem in front of you. Do the right thing even when it's terrifying. Everything else had followed from that. The job, the promotions, the opportunities he never could have imagined. Not because he'd been heroic or noble or any of that bullshit, just because he'd seen a problem and fixed it, consequences be damned. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe the point wasn't about grand gestures or perfect decisions. Maybe it was just about showing up, doing the work, making the scary choice when it presented itself. Maybe it was about being willing to run into the storm with nothing but your tools and your determination and the stubborn refusal to let someone die when you could help. Ethan had spent years thinking his life was a closed loop, that he'd always be the guy barely making rent and fixing cars for assholes like Gary Miller. But that wasn't fate. That was just fear dressed up as reality. The moment he chose differently, chose courage over security, chose helping over self-preservation, everything opened up. He didn't chase success. He just did what needed doing. And somehow, in the process of helping others, he'd helped himself. Built a life worth living, gave his son opportunities he'd never had, became someone he could actually be proud of. The city lights stretched out before him, full of other people making their own choices, fighting their own battles, deciding between safety and risk every single day. Ethan hoped they'd choose risk when it mattered, hoped they'd grab their tools and run into the rain, hoped they'd discover what he had, that the scariest choices were the ones that changed everything, and sometimes changing everything was exactly what you needed. Jake stirred on the couch. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah, I'm good. Better than good." "What are you thinking about?" Ethan looked at his son, at their new apartment, at the life they'd built from the wreckage of that rainy day. "Just thinking about how one decision can change everything, and how glad I am I made it." "The ambulance thing?" "The ambulance thing." Jake smiled and closed his eyes again. "Best stupid decision you ever made." Ethan laughed quietly and turned back to the window. Outside, the city celebrated the new year, full of possibility and promise and the unknown future. Inside, in their warm apartment with their new furniture and their old bond, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out, the peace of knowing he could handle whatever came next, the peace of understanding that he was enough. Not perfect, not finished growing, but enough. He'd run into the rain once when it mattered. He'd do it again if he had to. That was who he was now. Someone who chose courage over comfort. Someone who helped when he could. Someone who'd learned that doing the right thing didn't always cost you everything. Sometimes it gave you everything instead. The new year stretched ahead, full of challenges he couldn't predict and opportunities he couldn't imagine. But Ethan would face it the same way he'd faced everything this past year, with his tools, his determination, and the willingness to make the scary choice when the moment demanded it. And that, he was learning, was enough.